Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving deep into the most mysterious, haunting, and utterly terrifying secrets that our oceans hold. From ancient creatures that shouldn't exist to ships that vanish without explanation. From underwater cities lost to time to sounds so horrifying, they've kept scientists awake at night. The ocean covers over 70% of our planet, yet we've explored less than 5% of it. That means there's a whole world down there waiting in the darkness filled with mysteries that would make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant bedtime stories. So before we descend into these watery depths together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy diving into the unknown with me. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to join us on these midnight journeys into the abyss. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm blanket, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of the ocean's darkest secrets. When you think of the ocean, you might picture sunny beaches, gentle waves, and maybe a dolphin or two jumping playfully in the distance. But tonight, we're going somewhere else entirely. We're going to the places where light has never touched, where pressure would crush you in milliseconds, and where things live that evolution seems to have forgotten about. The ocean isn't just water. It's a three-dimensional alien world that exists right here on our planet, filled with creatures so bizarre they look like they were designed by someone having a particularly vivid nightmare. We're entering a realm where fish have their own built-in flashlights, where giant squids battle whales in epic underwater wars, and where the very geography itself seems to shift and change like a living thing. Picture this. You're floating on the surface of the ocean on a calm night. The water is black glass, reflecting stars you can barely make out. But beneath you, stretching down for miles and miles, is an abyss so deep that if you dropped Mount Everest into some parts of it, the peak wouldn't even come close to reaching the surface. And in that darkness, things are moving. Things are hunting, things are waiting. The ocean doesn't care about your fears or your comfort zone. It operates by rules so alien to our land-dwelling minds that even our most advanced science struggles to understand them. Down there in the deepest trenches, the pressure is over 1,000 times greater than what you experience sitting in your room right now. It would be like having the weight of 50 jumbo jets pressing down on every square inch of your body. And yet life thrives there. Not just survives, thrives. Creatures that have never seen sunlight, that have never felt warmth, that exist in a world of eternal midnight and crushing cold. They've adapted to conditions so extreme that they might as well be living on another planet entirely. Some of them glow with their own eerie light, creating constellations of bioluminescence in the absolute darkness. Others have evolved to be transparent, like living ghosts drifting through the water. But here's what really keeps oceanographers up at night. We keep finding new things down there, new species, new ecosystems, new mysteries that challenge everything we thought we knew about life on Earth. Every deep-sea expedition brings back footage of creatures that look like they crawled out of someone's fever dream. And for every new discovery, 10 more questions arise. The ocean has been keeping secrets for billions of years, and it's not about to give them up easily. It guards its mysteries jealously, hidden beneath miles of dark water and crushing pressure. But tonight, we're going to dive down into that alien world and explore some of the most spine-tingling, sleep-disrupting, absolutely fascinating mysteries that lurk in the depths. Because if you think you know what's scary, wait until you hear about what's been living in the deepest parts of our planet's oceans, right beneath our feet, all this time. And the really unsettling part? We're just beginning to scratch the surface. Let's start our journey in a place that sounds like it came straight out of a horror movie, the Mariana Trench. Located in the western Pacific Ocean, this underwater canyon is the deepest known part of Earth's oceans, plunging down over 36,000 feet below sea level. To put that in perspective, if you could somehow drain all the water out of the Mariana Trench and drop Mount Everest into it, the mountain's peak would still be over a mile underwater. The Mariana Trench isn't just deep, it's alien. The pressure down there is so intense that it would instantly crush any human body into something resembling chunky soup. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and there's no sunlight, no warmth, no comfort of any kind. It's as close to visiting another planet as you can get without leaving Earth. And yet, even in this hellish environment, life finds a way. Creatures have been discovered down there that defy our understanding of biology. In 2016, scientists found a ghostly white, gelatinous fish swimming at depths of over 26,000 feet. It moved so slowly it seemed to be drifting in slow motion, its body almost translucent, its eyes enormous black orbs that have adapted to capture even the faintest traces of light. This fish, later named the Mariana snailfish, is the deepest living fish ever discovered. But the truly unsettling thing is what we don't know. What else is down there, hiding in crevices and caves that human technology has never been able to reach? What creatures might be lurking in the absolute darkness, so well adapted to their environment that they've never needed to come up to where we might spot them? The Mariana Trench has been around for approximately 180 million years. That's 180 million years of evolution taking place in an environment completely isolated from the world we know. Imagine what kind of creatures could evolve over that kind of time span, in conditions so extreme they might as well be on another planet. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. In 2016, scientists lowered hydrophones into the Challenger Deep, the very deepest part of the Mariana Trench. What they recorded down there still haunts them to this day. Strange metallic sounds that couldn't be explained by any known natural phenomenon. Clicks and whistles and moans that didn't match any known marine species. And perhaps most disturbing of all, a low, persistent humming sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Some scientists tried to explain it away as the sound of water pressure, or distant underwater earthquakes, or even the hydrophones themselves malfunctioning under extreme conditions. But others aren't so sure. Whatever was making those sounds, it wasn't anything we've cataloged before. And it wasn't just a single event. The sounds continued, day after day, night after night, in a place where no sunlight has ever reached. In a place where, by all rights, complex life shouldn't even be possible. Yet something is down there. Something is communicating. Something is aware. And the Mariana Trench is just one of the ocean's many terrifying mysteries. Let's move on to something that might hit a little closer to home, something that's been happening in oceans all around the world, including waters people actually swim in. I'm talking about underwater disappearances, and not just of ships and planes, though we'll get to those too. I'm talking about people who vanish while swimming in seemingly safe waters, in calm conditions, often with other swimmers nearby who see nothing unusual. Take the case of Harold Henthorn, a strong swimmer who disappeared while swimming just 50 yards offshore at a popular beach in Southern California in 2019. The water was calm, visibility was excellent, and there were lifeguards on duty. One minute, witnesses saw him swimming parallel to the shore, seemingly fine. The next minute, he was gone. No splashing, no calls for help, no signs of distress whatsoever. It was as if the ocean had simply reached up and plucked him from the surface. His body was never found, despite an extensive search using boats, helicopters, and underwater drones. No shark attacks were reported in the area that day. No unusual currents were detected. The autopsy report on Harold Henthorn reads simply, cause of death, undetermined. And Harold's case isn't unique. Every year, dozens of experienced swimmers vanish from beaches around the world under similar circumstances. No signs of struggle, no evidence of animal attacks, often in calm waters with good visibility. They simply disappear beneath the waves as if something had pulled them down. Marine biologists and oceanographers have proposed various theories. Sudden rip currents, unexpected medical emergencies, even the possibility of powerful downward pulling vortexes created by underwater geological features. But these explanations don't always satisfy the families of the disappeared, especially when the conditions seemed perfect and the swimmers were experienced. Some coastal communities have legends about the ocean claiming people, as if it were a conscious entity selecting individuals to take. Indigenous peoples from coastal regions around the world have similar stories, spanning cultures that never had contact with each other. Tales of ocean spirits or deities that occasionally require human sacrifice. Of course, modern science dismisses these as superstition and folklore. But when you're floating on your back in the ocean, looking up at the endless sky, it's hard not to wonder what might be looking up at you from the endless depths below. What might be considering whether today is the day it reaches up to claim another swimmer. Whether today is the day it claims you. Sleep well with that thought tonight. Now let's dive deeper, literally, into one of the most persistent and chilling ocean mysteries, the vast underwater networks that we're only beginning to discover. For decades, scientists believed that the ocean floor was largely a barren, featureless plain, interrupted occasionally by trenches or underwater mountains. But recent deep-sea exploration has revealed something far more complex and, frankly, more terrifying. The ocean floor is riddled with vast cave systems, tunnels, and subterranean channels that stretch for hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles. Some of these underwater cave systems are so enormous that they could comfortably house entire cities. And here's the truly unsettling part. Many of them connect. Divers have discovered that caves in the Caribbean connect to tunnels that eventually lead to cave systems off the coast of Florida, hundreds of miles away. Similar connected networks have been found in the Mediterranean, the South Pacific, and off the coast of Australia. These aren't just simple caves, either. They're complex, multi-level labyrinths with chambers the size of cathedrals. And they're largely unexplored because of how dangerous they are. Cave diving is already considered the most dangerous form of diving, with hundreds of experienced divers losing their lives each year when they become disoriented in underwater caves. But these deep ocean cave systems take that danger to an entirely new level. The deepest explored so far reaches down over 2,000 feet below the surface, and it doesn't end there. The passage keeps going, descending into darkness beyond the reach of our current diving technology. What lives in these vast underwater cave networks? What has evolved in isolation? In the darkness? Over millions of years? We've barely begun to find out. The creatures discovered so far in these deep cave systems are like nothing you've seen before. Blind albino crustaceans, with limbs so delicate they look like they're made of glass. Translucent fish, with no eyes but rows of hypersensitive feelers that can detect the electrical impulses of other living creatures from hundreds of feet away. Ancient species of sharks thought to have gone extinct millions of years ago, found living unchanged in the darkness of these underwater caverns. But perhaps most disturbing are the massive, gelatinous gelatinous organisms found floating in the largest chambers of these cave systems. Some of them stretch over 30 feet in length, but are so transparent they're almost invisible in the water. They appear to have no recognizable organs, no brain as we understand it, yet they react intelligently to stimuli. They avoid divers, retreating into tiny crevices that their massive bodies shouldn't be able to fit through, somehow compressing themselves down to a fraction of their size. Scientists who study these creatures report having vivid, disturbing nightmares after their encounters. Dreams of vast, pulsing networks, spreading throughout all the world's oceans, connecting and communicating in ways we can't comprehend. One biologist who spent 6 months studying these organisms became convinced they were all part of a single entity, a massive, diffuse intelligence that spans the globe. He quit his research position and moved to a landlocked state, refusing to ever go near the ocean again. When pressed for his reasons, he would only say, "It knows we're looking at it now, and it doesn't like it." He died 3 months later of an apparent heart attack, though the coroner noted unusual cellular abnormalities in his tissue samples that couldn't be readily explained. His research notes were classified by the Oceanographic Institute he worked for and have never been released to the public. Sleep tight knowing that these vast cave networks exist just offshore of beaches, where millions swim every day, largely unmapped, mostly unexplored, and home to organisms we barely understand. Let's change course slightly and talk about something that's been reported for centuries by sailors and maritime workers around the world: the phenomenon of underwater lights. Not bioluminescence, which is well understood and documented, but structured, patterned lights that appear in deep water, often in formations that suggest intelligence or purpose. These aren't just random sailor stories either. In 2023, the crew of a research vessel in the South Pacific documented a grid of lights nearly half a mile across, glowing steadily at a depth of over 3,000 feet. The lights maintain perfect geometric patterns, squares, circles, and straight lines that couldn't possibly be natural formations. When the vessel attempted to lower cameras to investigate, the lights immediately went dark. They reappeared several hours later, after the ship had moved on, captured by automated monitoring equipment left behind. Similar light formations have been documented in the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and particularly frequently in the deepest parts of the Mediterranean Sea. The patterns are always geometric, always structured in ways that suggest artificial origin. Yet they appear in areas of the ocean floor where no human structures exist, where no cables have been laid, where no underwater bases have been built, at least none that any government acknowledges. Some marine biologists have proposed the theory that these might be previously unknown colonies of bioluminescent organisms that have evolved to arrange themselves in geometric patterns, perhaps as a defense mechanism or a way to attract prey. But this explanation falls short when confronted with the reported behavior of these light formations. They react to observation. They change patterns when cameras are lowered toward them. They appear to communicate with each other across vast distances, with one light grid changing in response to alterations in another grid miles away. This suggests not just life, but intelligent life, or at least a form of collective intelligence that we don't yet understand. In 1973, a Soviet deep-sea research vessel reportedly captured footage of one of these light grids transforming into what crew members described as an underwater city, with structures resembling buildings and roads all made of light. The footage was never released publicly, and the research program was suddenly shut down shortly afterward. 3 of the crew members who witnessed the event died under unusual circumstances within a year, 2 in apparent suicides, 1 in an unexplained diving accident during a recreational dive in shallow water. The most recent documented encounter with these light phenomena occurred in 2023, when a private research submarine exploring the Puerto Rico Trench reported seeing a massive grid of blue-white lights stretching beyond the range of their visibility. The grid appeared to pulse in a regular pattern, almost like a heartbeat or a form of communication. When the submarine approached, the lights did not disappear as in previous encounters. Instead, they intensified and began to arrange themselves in new patterns, concentric circles surrounding the submarine's position. The crew described feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched, of being studied by something vast and alien. The submarine's electronic systems began to malfunction, and the crew made the decision to surface immediately. As they ascended, they reported that a column of lights rose with them, maintaining the same distance, all the way up to about 500 feet below the surface, where the lights finally dispersed. Every crew member independently reported having the same nightmare for weeks afterward. Dreams of vast, luminous cities under the sea, populated by shadowy figures that were almost but not quite human in form. What are these lights? Are they evidence of underwater civilizations, either non-human or perhaps remnants of ancient human cultures that found a way to survive beneath the waves? Are they manifestations of Earth species so different from us that we can't recognize their intelligence? Or are they something else entirely? Something our human minds can't even properly conceptualize? The ocean keeps this secret closely guarded, revealing only enough to remind us how little we truly know about the vast, dark world that covers most of our planet. Now, let's talk about something that bridges the gap between science and legend: the mysterious underwater structures found around the world that don't seem to fit into our understanding of human history. We're not talking about obvious sunken cities, like parts of Alexandria or Port Royal, which we know were once above water and have well-documented histories. We're talking about massive, complex stone structures found at depths that, according to our current understanding of sea level changes, should have been underwater for the last 20,000 years or more. The most famous of these is perhaps the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, a massive underwater rock formation with sharp angles, straight edges, and features that appear to be stairs, columns, and roads. Mainstream archaeology considers it a natural formation, albeit an unusual one. But many who have dived the site, including some marine geologists, argue that at least parts of it show evidence of human modification. The debate continues, but Yonaguni is just the beginning. Less well known, but perhaps more compelling, are the underwater structures found near Cuba in 2001, discovered during a survey of the seafloor using advanced sonar equipment. The sonar revealed what appeared to be a complex of geometric structures covering an area of about 2 square kilometers at a depth of around 700 meters. The formations appeared to include pyramids, circular buildings, and what looked like roads or ceremonial pathways, all arranged in patterns reminiscent of urban planning. When the research team sent down cameras to investigate further, they captured images of massive stone blocks, perfectly cut and fitted together, some weighing an estimated 50 tons or more. The Cuban government initially supported further research, but abruptly withdrew funding in 2003, and no major expeditions have been permitted in the area since. Scientists involved in the initial discovery have been notably silent on the subject in subsequent years, and requests for the original sonar data and images have been consistently denied. The few images that did make it to public view show structures that, if they are indeed artificial, would completely rewrite our understanding of human history and capabilities. Similar underwater anomalies have been found off the coast of India, in the Mediterranean near Malta, and perhaps, most mysteriously, in Lake Titicaca, in South America, where divers have discovered paved roads and wall-like structures extending from the shore down to depths of over 100 feet, far below any recorded historical low-water mark for the lake. What's particularly unsettling about these discoveries is not just their implication for human history, but the pattern of research suppression that seems to follow them. Expeditions are defunded, permits are denied, equipment mysteriously malfunctions, and researchers sometimes find their professional reputations inexplicably damaged if they push too hard for answers. It's almost as if something doesn't want us looking too closely at what lies beneath the waves. As if the ocean itself is guarding secrets that would fundamentally alter our understanding of our place in the world. And perhaps that's the most terrifying aspect of these underwater mysteries. Not what we know, but what seems to be actively kept from our knowledge. Let's shift our focus to something that's been reported by sailors and maritime workers for centuries, but has only recently begun to receive serious scientific attention: the phenomenon of megabubbles. These are not small bubbles rising from the ocean floor, but massive sudden eruptions of gas that can span hundreds or even thousands of feet in diameter. They typically occur without warning, turning the normally layered ocean water into a frothy, turbulent mass that can no longer support the weight of ships sailing above. There are historical accounts of ships simply disappearing into these areas of suddenly bubbling ocean, dropping straight down as if the water beneath them had turned to air. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as sailor superstition or attempts to explain away navigational errors that led to ships running aground on submerged reefs. But in recent decades, science has confirmed that megabubbles are a real phenomenon, and they're far more common than previously thought. The primary cause is methane eruptions from the sea floor. Vast deposits of methane hydrate, essentially methane gas trapped in ice-like structures, lie beneath the ocean floor in many parts of the world. When these deposits are disturbed, whether by underwater landslides, earthquakes, or changes in pressure or temperature, the methane can be released suddenly and violently, creating a massive column of bubbles rising to the surface. The result is an area of water with significantly reduced density, water that can no longer support the weight of a ship. In 2023, researchers using satellite imaging identified over 300 locations in the world's oceans where megabubble events had recently occurred, many in heavily trafficked shipping lanes. Analysis of shipping records and disappearances over the past century revealed a disturbing correlation. A significant number of unexplained ship disappearances had occurred in these same areas. But here's where the mystery deepens, beyond the established science. Some megabubble events don't seem to be associated with known methane deposits. They occur in areas where the ocean floor has been thoroughly mapped and no significant gas deposits have been identified. Even more disturbing, some of these unexplained megabubbles appear to behave in ways that natural gas eruptions shouldn't. They persist for unnaturally long periods, sometimes hours or even days. They move against currents, sometimes appearing to actively pursue ships. And in a few documented cases, they've exhibited patterns that suggest purpose or intelligence, expanding and contracting rhythmically, forming geometric shapes, or creating what observers have described as walls of bubbles that encircle specific areas of ocean. In 2021, a research vessel in the South China Sea encountered such a phenomenon, a massive, persistent bubble formation that formed a perfect circle around the ship, extending for about half a mile in every direction. The bubbling was intense enough that the water level within the circle was noticeably lower than outside it, creating what appeared to be a gentle but distinct slope in the ocean's surface. The ship's engines failed inexplicably, and all electronic equipment, including backup systems, went dead. For 6 hours, the vessel was trapped in this circle of bubbling water, while the crew reported experiencing intense feelings of disorientation and dread. Several crew members independently reported hearing voices in the sound of the bubbling water, unintelligible words in no language they recognized, but clearly speech-like in pattern and rhythm. When the phenomenon finally dissipated, the ship's systems came back online without explanation, and the vessel was able to continue its journey. Subsequent analysis of water samples taken during the event showed no unusual gas content or other abnormalities that could explain what had happened. Scientists remain divided on whether these more unusual megabubble events have natural explanations we haven't yet discovered, or whether something more inexplicable might be occurring in our oceans. What is clear is that the ocean floor contains vast amounts of methane and other gases under tremendous pressure, and our understanding of how and why these gases sometimes erupt to the surface is still in its infancy. So the next time you're on a ship crossing a deep stretch of ocean and you notice the water around you beginning to bubble and froth, you might wonder, is this just a natural gas eruption about to swallow your vessel? Or is it something else, something more purposeful, something that has decided it wants your ship and everyone on it, for reasons we can't begin to comprehend? Pleasant dreams on your next ocean cruise. Let's turn our attention to one of the most persistent and terrifying ocean mysteries, the phenomenon known as rogue waves. For centuries, sailors returned from voyages with tales of monstrous waves that appeared out of nowhere, towering walls of water that rose up suddenly from an otherwise calm sea. These waves were said to reach heights of 80, 90, even 100 feet, dwarfing even the largest ships and striking without warning. For most of maritime history, these accounts were dismissed as exaggerations or outright fabrications, the tall tales of sailors known for their superstitions and storytelling. The scientific consensus was clear. Waves simply couldn't behave that way, according to our understanding of hydrodynamics. Waves build gradually, influenced by wind, currents, and the ocean floor. They don't just materialize at enormous heights from a calm sea. But then, on January 1st, 1995, something happened that forced scientists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about ocean waves. The Dropner oil platform in the North Sea was struck by a single massive wave that registered on the platform's monitoring equipment. This was the first time a rogue wave had been measured by scientific instruments, and the data was stunning. In a sea with average wave heights of around 40 feet, a single 85-foot monster had suddenly appeared, struck the platform with devastating force, and then disappeared. The wave didn't build gradually. It simply materialized, as if out of nowhere, towering more than twice as high as the waves around it. Since that first recorded incident, scientific instruments have documented dozens of similar rogue waves around the world. We now know they're real, but we still don't fully understand why or how they form. The current scientific explanation involves complex interactions of different wave patterns, certain configurations of currents, and specific ocean floor topographies. But these explanations still don't account for all the properties of rogue waves that have been observed, particularly their apparent ability to form in conditions that shouldn't allow for them. And here's where we venture into more mysterious waters, because there are aspects of rogue wave reports that go beyond our current scientific understanding. For instance, there are numerous accounts from credible witnesses of rogue waves that appear to behave almost purposefully. Waves that change direction unexpectedly, seeming to target specific vessels. Waves that persist longer than should be physically possible, maintaining their height and structure as they travel impossible distances. Waves that form distinct, unnatural shapes, perfect pyramids, rectangular walls of water, even waves with what appears to be a hollow center, like a massive liquid tunnel, rising from the sea. In 2018, a commercial freighter in the Pacific reported encountering a rogue wave with a most unusual property. The wave, estimated at over 70 feet tall, was described by multiple crew members as being darker than the surrounding water, almost black in color. As it approached the ship, crew reported hearing an unusual low-frequency sound that made them feel physically ill. The wave struck the vessel with tremendous force but caused less damage than would have been expected, instead leaving behind a thick, oily residue that couldn't be identified in subsequent analysis. Every crew member who came in contact with this residue developed unusual symptoms in the following days. Intense, vivid nightmares featuring deep-sea environments they had never seen, temporary alterations in color perception, and in 3 cases, the unexplained development of small, hard growths under the skin that doctors were unable to identify. These growths eventually disappeared on their own after several weeks, leaving no trace except small, perfectly circular scars. Rogue waves remain one of the ocean's most terrifying phenomena because of their unpredictability and devastating power. Modern ships, even the largest ocean liners and container vessels, are not designed to withstand the impact of a true monster wave appearing suddenly from an otherwise manageable sea. And if some of the more unusual reports are to be believed, there may be varieties of these waves that have properties we can't yet explain. Waves that seem to defy the known laws of physics. Waves that carry mysterious substances or effects. Waves that almost seem to hunt specific targets across the open ocean. Next time you're on a ship and feel it rise suddenly on an unexpectedly large swell, you might wonder, is this just an ordinary wave? Or is it the precursor to something much larger, something ancient and implacable, rising from the depths with your vessel in its sights? Something that's been watching, waiting for just the right moment to reach up and claim you for the deep? Sleep well on your next ocean crossing. Now let's explore one of the most fundamental and yet most mysterious aspects of the deep ocean, the phenomenon of deep-sea currents, particularly what oceanographers call ghost currents. Most people are familiar with surface ocean currents, like the Gulf Stream, powerful rivers of moving water driven by wind, temperature differences, and Earth's rotation. But far below the surface, in the dark, crushing depths of the deep ocean, there exists another network of currents that behaves in ways we still don't fully understand. These deep-sea currents can be massive, moving more water than all the world's rivers combined. They flow in patterns that often seem to defy our models of how water should behave, sometimes moving against gravity, sometimes flowing in perfect circles that maintain their integrity for decades or even centuries. Some of these currents have temperatures that don't match their surroundings, remaining unusually warm or cold as they travel thousands of miles through the deep. But the most mysterious of all are the ghost currents, powerful, fast-moving streams of water that appear suddenly in the deep ocean, flow for a period of time ranging from hours to months, and then disappear completely, leaving no trace of their passage. These ghost currents have been detected by deep-sea monitoring equipment all over the world, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the Arctic to the Southern Ocean. They don't correlate with any known oceanographic phenomena, not underwater earthquakes, not temperature changes, not interactions with underwater geological features. They simply appear, flow, and vanish, as if they're being deliberately created and then erased. What makes ghost currents particularly unsettling is their apparent effect on deep-sea life. When these currents appear, unusual concentrations of deep-sea creatures have been observed gathering in their path. Species that normally never interact have been documented, clustering together in the flow of these ghost currents, sometimes in configurations that almost appear organized or purposeful. In several cases, deep-sea cameras have captured images of fish and other marine creatures arranging themselves in geometric patterns within these currents, perfect circles, spirals, and in one particularly disturbing instance, what appeared to be a recognizable symbol similar to ancient writing systems from multiple human cultures. In 2022, a research submersible studying the Haddle Zone, the deepest regions of the ocean trenches, encountered a ghost current at a depth of nearly 30,000 feet. The current appeared suddenly, powerful enough to push the submersible off course despite its thrusters operating at maximum capacity. The vessel's external cameras captured footage of the surrounding water, literally changing color as the current passed, shifting from the normal deep-sea black to a pulsing deep indigo that the crew described as mesmerizing and impossible to look away from. Within this strangely colored water, the cameras recorded something that the scientific team still struggles to explain: what appeared to be structures moving within the current. Not solid objects, but patterns in the water itself, complex three-dimensional formations that maintain their shape despite the turbulent flow around them. Some crew members described them as resembling cities seen from above, others as something more organic, like circulatory systems or neural networks. Whatever they were, they moved with the current for nearly 15 minutes before the water suddenly returned to its normal state, and the ghost current disappeared as abruptly as it had arrived. The submersible's instruments recorded several anomalies during the encounter: brief but significant changes in water density, unusual electromagnetic readings, and perhaps most inexplicably, a 3-minute period where all organic material samples on board the vessel appeared to age at an accelerated rate, some degrading months or years' worth in those few minutes before stabilizing again. The crew members themselves reported no physical effects except for unusually vivid dreams in the weeks following the incident, often featuring what they described as underwater architecture and cities that shouldn't exist. What are these ghost currents? Are they simply a natural phenomenon we don't yet understand? Or are they something more deliberate, more purposeful, perhaps the circulation system of something vast and conscious that resides in the deep ocean? Or doorways, temporarily opening between our world and somewhere else entirely? The ocean keeps this secret closely guarded, revealing only tantalizing glimpses of possibilities that might be more terrifying than we're prepared to contemplate. Let's dive into one of the most persistent and chilling mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon of underwater sounds that can't be explained by known, natural, or human sources. The ocean is naturally full of sounds: the calls of whales and dolphins, the movement of water, the rumble of underwater earthquakes and volcanoes. We've been recording and studying these sounds for decades, building extensive libraries of identified ocean acoustics. But scattered throughout these recordings are sounds that don't match anything in our catalogs, sounds that continue to baffle marine biologists and oceanographers. Perhaps the most famous is the bloop, a ultra-low frequency sound detected by NOAA hydrophones in 1997, so powerful it was picked up by sensors over 3,000 miles apart. The sound's profile was similar to that made by a living creature, but it was far too loud to be produced by any known animal. Even the largest blue whale couldn't come close to generating a sound of that magnitude. NOAA eventually attributed it to ice calving in Antarctica, but some researchers remain unconvinced, pointing out discrepancies in the acoustic signature compared to known ice events. Less well known but perhaps more disturbing is what researchers call the deep moaning, a sound first recorded in the Mariana Trench in 2012, and captured dozens of times since. It's a low resonant sound that lasts for exactly 3 minutes and 27 seconds each time it occurs, with precisely the same acoustic pattern, something virtually impossible in natural sounds, which always shows some variation. More unsettling still, the deep moan has been recorded simultaneously in different ocean trenches, thousands of miles apart, always starting and stopping at exactly the same moment. Then there's the water whisper, a high-frequency sound captured by hydrophones in the Indian Ocean that, when slowed down and analyzed, appears to contain patterns eerily similar to human speech. Linguistic experts who've studied these patterns have found phoneme-like structures and repeating elements that suggest language, though not one related to any known human tongue. The whisper has never been recorded in the same location twice, but follows a pattern of movement that traces a perfect spiral across the Indian Ocean floor over time. Perhaps most disturbing of all is what deep-sea researchers have nicknamed the Midnight Pulse, a rhythmic, mechanical-sounding series of clicks and thumps first recorded in the South Pacific in 2023. What makes the Midnight Pulse so unsettling is not just its unnatural regularity, but the fact that it appears to be responding to human activity. When research vessels come within a certain range, the pulse changes its pattern, becoming faster and more complex. If the vessels move closer, it stops completely, resuming only when they retreat beyond a specific distance. During one research expedition, attempting to locate the source of a midnight pulse, something unprecedented occurred. As the research vessel approached the approximate location of the sound, the pulse suddenly increased in volume and complexity, taking on a pattern that mathematical analysis later showed was a prime number sequence. All electronic equipment on the ship failed simultaneously, including backup systems designed to be impervious to electromagnetic interference. For 12 minutes, the ship was dead in the water, with the pulse sound now audible directly through the hull, loud enough that crew members reported feeling it physically resonating in their bodies. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the event ended. The pulse stopped, all systems came back online, and subsequent attempts to relocate the sound source were unsuccessful. It had apparently moved, though no underwater displacement was detected on sonar. Several crew members reported experiencing the same dream that night, a vast, dark space filled with rhythmic, pulsing lights, and a sense of being observed by something ancient and patient. What are these sounds? Are they manifestations of deep-sea geological processes we don't yet understand? Unknown animal species with communication methods, unlike anything we've studied before? Or something else entirely? Perhaps evidence of non-human intelligence that has existed in our oceans for millennia, watching, listening, occasionally reaching out in ways we can barely perceive, let alone comprehend? The next time you hear an unusual sound while swimming in the ocean, you might wonder, is it just the movement of water? Or is it something responding to your presence, something that has been aware of you from the moment you entered its domain? Now let's explore a phenomenon that bridges the gap between science and folklore, the mystery of flash freezing at sea. There are documented cases throughout maritime history of ships encountering sections of ocean where the temperature drops catastrophically within minutes, sometimes seconds. Waters that were previously at normal temperatures suddenly begin to crystallize, forming ice with incredible speed. These events have been responsible for numerous shipwrecks and disappearances over the centuries, with vessels becoming trapped in ice that, by all rights, shouldn't have been there. Modern science recognizes a phenomenon called supercooling, where water can remain liquid below its freezing point under certain conditions, then crystallize rapidly when disturbed. This occurs most commonly in polar regions, where specific combinations of temperature, salinity, and current can create the necessary conditions. But what science struggles to explain are the numerous reports of flash freezing events in temperate or even tropical waters, far from any polar influence. In 1978, a fishing vessel off the coast of Florida reported sailing into a patch of ocean where the air temperature plummeted from 75 degrees Fahrenheit to near freezing in less than 5 minutes. The water around the ship began to crystallize rapidly, forming a thin sheet of ice that spread outward from the vessel in all directions. The crew described the ice as unlike normal ice, darker in color, almost blue-black, and with a strange fibrous texture that made it unusually difficult to break. The event lasted approximately 20 minutes before conditions returned to normal, the ice melting as quickly as it had formed, leaving no trace except the crew's documentation and samples of the unusual ice that, upon later analysis, were found to contain organic compounds that couldn't be identified. More recently, in 2023, a research vessel in the South Pacific recorded an even more dramatic instance. The ship sailed into what the captain described as a cold spot in otherwise warm tropical waters. Instruments recorded a temperature drop from 82 degrees Fahrenheit to 14 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 30 seconds, a rate of change that should be physically impossible for such a large body of water. The sea around the ship didn't merely freeze, it solidified into a substance that, while appearing to be ice, behaved differently from normal frozen water. This substance formed perfect geometric shapes, hexagons, octagons, and more complex polyhedrons that fit together in patterns the crew described as like a massive, intricate puzzle spreading across the ocean. The formation extended as far as visibility allowed in all directions, creating what appeared to be a solid surface over the water. Most disturbing of all, the crew reported that this ice-like substance seemed to be emerging not from the surface down, as normal freezing would progress, but from deep below, rising up to the surface in those perfect geometric formations. The event ended after approximately 40 minutes, with the strange substance dissolving back into normal seawater. Analysis of samples revealed water with an unusual molecular structure, showing properties that one researcher described as more like a crystalline organism than inanimate ice. Several crew members who had direct contact with the substance reported unusual dreams in the following weeks, often featuring vast, geometric structures underwater and the sensation of being pulled down into darkness. What causes these inexplicable freezing events? Are they the result of undiscovered oceanographic processes, perhaps involving sudden upwellings from the deep ocean where different physical laws seem to apply? Or are they manifestations of something more unusual, perhaps the defensive mechanism of some vast, diffuse organism that spans sections of the ocean? Or doorways, briefly opening between our world and somewhere much colder, somewhere with different physical properties, somewhere perhaps not entirely empty of awareness? The next time you're swimming in warm ocean waters and feel a sudden, unexpected cold spot, you might wonder, is it just a normal current bringing cooler water from below? Or is it the beginning of something else, something ancient and alien that has momentarily turned its attention to you? Something that could, if it wished, transform the water around you into a substance that looks like ice, but behaves according to rules we don't understand. Stay warm in your bed tonight with that thought drifting through your mind. Let's explore one of the most persistent yet least discussed oceanic mysteries, the phenomenon of underwater mirages and false environments. Most people are familiar with atmospheric mirages, optical illusions caused by the refraction of light through air layers of different temperatures. But similar phenomena occur underwater, and they can be far more complex and disorienting than their atmospheric counterparts. Divers and submersible pilots have reported encountering what appear to be entire underwater landscapes that, upon approach, dissolve into nothing. These aren't simple distortions of light and shadow, but fully realized environments, underwater canyons that don't exist on any chart, forests of swaying vegetation, in areas known to be barren, even structures resembling buildings or monuments that disappear when approached. Marine scientists attribute most of these experiences to combinations of thermoclines, layers of water with different temperatures, haloclines, layers with different salinity, and unusual current patterns creating complex light refraction. But this explanation fails to account for some of the more elaborate and persistent false environments that have been documented, particularly those witnessed simultaneously by multiple observers. In 2018, a team of technical divers exploring a deep underwater cave system off the Yucatan Peninsula all reported seeing the same impossible landscape, what appeared to be an ancient city square, complete with column structures and statue-like forms, illuminated by a diffuse light that had no apparent source. The team, composed of experienced divers with no history of nitrogen narcosis or other diving-related perception issues, documented the phenomenon with multiple cameras. Yet none of the footage showed the city they all clearly saw. Instead, the videos showed only the expected rock formations of the cave system. When the divers turned to look at each other, they could see their teammates floating, not in the water of a cave, but apparently standing on solid ground in the Phantom City. Several team members reported hearing faint sounds during the experience, what they described as distant chanting or singing in no recognizable language. The phenomenon persisted for approximately 12 minutes before dissolving back into the normal cave environment, leaving the divers disoriented and struggling to reconcile what they had collectively experienced with the reality captured by their equipment. Even more disturbing are reports from deep-sea submersible pilots who have encountered what they describe as false surfaces, what appears to be the ocean floor or the surface of the water, but at impossible depths or in impossible locations. In 2021, a research submersible operating in the Sunda Trench at a depth of over 20,000 feet encountered what the pilot described as a perfect mirror image of the ocean surface, complete with the underside of waves and the distorted light patterns you would expect to see looking up from about 30 feet down, not from the crushing dark of the trench floor. As the submersible approached this impossible surface, instruments recorded no change in depth or pressure, confirming they were still at trench depth, despite what they were seeing. The pilot reported that as they touched this false surface, it rippled like water but did not break or allow passage. Instead, the submersible's mechanical arm, when extended into this surface, appeared to elongate impossibly, stretching dozens of feet without disconnecting from the vessel. When withdrawn, the arm returned to normal dimensions with no damage, though subsequent analysis showed unusual molecular changes in the metal that engineers could not explain. What are these underwater mirages and false environments? Are they merely complex optical illusions created by peculiar combinations of underwater conditions? Or are they something more, perhaps glimpses into other realities that occasionally intersect with our own deep beneath the waves? Or manifestations of consciousness, either human projections amplified by the unusual properties of the deep ocean, or something else entirely, something native to the deep that can create illusions, so perfect they can fool human senses, and even interact physically with our technology. The next time you're swimming in clear water and notice the seabed seems strangely distant or distorted, you might wonder, is it just the normal refraction of light through water? Or are you seeing something else, something that isn't really there in the physical sense we understand? Or perhaps something that is there but exists according to rules and in dimensions our minds aren't equipped to properly perceive. Sweet dreams as you float above the abyss. Let's explore what might be the most unsettling of all ocean mysteries, the phenomenon of underwater time anomalies. These are locations in the ocean where time itself seems to behave differently, flowing faster or slower than in the surrounding environment, or even appearing to loop or fracture in ways that defy our understanding of physics. While mainstream science remains skeptical of such reports, the sheer number of documented cases from credible witnesses has led some researchers to investigate the possibility that certain underwater environments might indeed affect the flow of time in measurable ways. The most well-documented of these sites is an area in the Western Pacific known to local fishermen as the Long Night Waters. Ships passing through this roughly circular area, approximately 3 miles in diameter, consistently report that the journey takes significantly longer than it should, based on their speed and the distance traveled. Clocks and watches on board often show discrepancies, typically running slower while in the area. More disturbing are the reports from crews that the night seems to stretch unnaturally while crossing the long night waters, with darkness persisting for hours longer than it should, according to nautical almanacs and GPS time. In 2020, a research vessel equipped with atomic clocks and other precise timekeeping instruments deliberately sailed through the long night waters to investigate these reports. The results were difficult to explain within our current understanding of physics. The atomic clocks, designed to be accurate to within billionths of a second, showed a discrepancy of nearly 40 minutes after passing through the area. They ran slower than identical clocks left on shore, despite being synchronized immediately before the journey. More puzzling still, this time dilation effect wasn't consistent throughout the ship. Clocks on the bridge showed different discrepancies than those in the engine room, and crew members reported subjective experiences of time that varied depending on where they were stationed on the vessel. Even more difficult to explain were the biological effects observed in both crew members and marine specimens collected from the area. Cell samples taken from crew members before, during, and after passing through the long night waters showed different rates of metabolic activity and cellular division, as if the biological processes themselves were occurring at different speeds. Marine organisms collected from the area exhibited highly unusual properties, including accelerated growth rates when removed from the waters, followed by rapid deterioration and death. Perhaps most disturbing was the effect on electronic recording equipment. Video cameras operating continuously throughout the passage showed unexplainable anomalies in the footage. Objects moved in non-linear ways, appearing to skip forward or backward in tiny increments. Background elements in the frame changed position or appearance without any visible transition. And in several instances, crew members appeared in the footage in two places simultaneously, despite there being no editing or technical explanation for these duplications. Several crew members reported unusual subjective experiences while in the long night waters, the sensation of performing actions they had already completed, memories of conversations that other crew members had no recollection of, and in two particularly troubling cases, detailed memories of events from their childhood that family members later confirmed had never occurred. One researcher described it as feeling like my past was being rewritten as we moved through that water, like causality itself was becoming fluid and unreliable. What causes these time anomalies? Some theoretical physicists have proposed that certain combinations of extreme depth, unusual electromagnetic properties in the ocean floor, and specific gravitational anomalies might create conditions where relativistic effects become observable at macro scales, rather than just at the quantum level, where we normally expect to see such phenomena. Others suggest more exotic explanations, the possibility that these areas might be thin points between dimensions, where the rules of our universe intermingle with different physical laws from elsewhere. Whatever the explanation, the existence of these anomalous zones raises disturbing possibilities. If time can behave differently in certain parts of the deep ocean, what other fundamental properties of reality might also be mutable down there? And what might exist in environments where time flows differently? Perhaps life forms or even intelligences that experience reality at rates so different from our own that meaningful interaction would be impossible. Entities that might perceive our entire human civilization as a brief, fleeting moment in their vastly extended temporal experience. The next time you're on a boat and feel that strange sense of time slowing down that often comes with being on the water, you might wonder, is it just your mind adjusting to the rhythms of the sea? Or have you drifted into waters where time itself flows differently, where the rules you've taken for granted your entire life no longer fully apply? Sleep well with that thought drifting through your dreams tonight. Let's explore another disturbing aspect of the deep ocean, the phenomenon known as dead waters, areas where ships mysteriously lose power and maneuverability, despite having functional engines and favorable conditions. This phenomenon has been reported for centuries by sailors around the world, often described in folklore as places where sea spirits or underwater deities reach up to trap vessels. Modern science has identified one mechanism for dead waters, the creation of internal waves at the boundary between water layers of different densities, which can indeed create unusual drag on ships. But this explanation doesn't account for all reported instances, particularly those where vessels with modern engines suddenly lose all power in waters where no such layering exists. In 2023, a state-of-the-art research vessel equipped with the latest propulsion technology encountered such an unexplainable dead zone in the Central Pacific. Despite calm seas, no unusual currents, and all systems functioning normally according to diagnostics, the ship's forward progress suddenly ceased. The engines continued to run at full power, the propellers turned, but the vessel remained stationary as if held in place by an invisible force. Attempts to maneuver in any direction failed, and even deployment of emergency thrusters, designed to operate independently of the main propulsion system, had no effect. The phenomenon persisted for nearly 6 hours, during which time the crew reported a number of disturbing observations. The water around the ship appeared normal at first glance but behaved oddly upon closer inspection. Objects dropped overboard didn't sink normally. They descended at varying speeds, sometimes stopping entirely at certain depths before continuing downward. Small boats lowered to test maneuverability found they could move freely only within a radius of about 100 yards from the main vessel, beyond which they encountered the same immobilizing effect. More unsettling were the effects on electronic equipment. Compass readings fluctuated wildly. GPS systems showed the vessel simultaneously in multiple locations, hundreds of miles apart, and communication equipment received signals that appeared to be their own transmissions, but distorted and delayed by varying intervals. Several crew members reported hearing unusual sounds coming from below the ship, not the normal creaks and groans of a vessel at sea, but rhythmic, almost mechanical sounds that one engineer described as like enormous gears turning somewhere deep beneath us. The event ended as abruptly as it had begun, with the ship suddenly lurching forward at full speed as if released from restraint. Subsequent analysis of the ship's systems showed no mechanical explanation for the phenomenon. However, examination of hull-mounted sensors revealed something peculiar during the 6-hour immobilization. The chemical composition of the water around the ship had subtly changed, showing elevated levels of compounds typically found only in deep-sea hydrothermal vents, despite the ship being thousands of miles from any known vent field. Additionally, biological samples collected during the event contained microscopic organisms with cellular structures, unlike anything in scientific catalogs, organisms that deteriorated so rapidly after collection that detailed study proved impossible. What causes these dead waters that can immobilize even the most powerful modern vessels? Are they manifestations of ocean processes we don't yet understand, perhaps localized gravitational anomalies, or temporary changes in the fundamental properties of water itself? Or are they evidence of something more deliberate? Defensive mechanisms of vast, unknown entities that inhabit the deep, or perhaps the oceanographic equivalent of a spider's web, designed to trap and hold vessels for purposes we can only speculate about. The next time you're on a boat and feel it slow unexpectedly, the engine straining against some invisible resistance, you might wonder, is it just an ordinary current or change in water density? Or have you drifted into waters where normal physical laws are temporarily suspended, where something ancient and vast has noticed your presence and decided, for reasons of its own, to hold you in place for a while? To study you perhaps, or simply to remind you that for all our technological advancement, the ocean remains a place where human control is always provisional, always subject to revocation, by forces we barely comprehend. Sleep tight on your next ocean voyage. Let's explore one of the most mysterious and unsettling phenomena reported by deep-sea explorers: encounters with what can only be described as living water. These are instances where the water itself appears to behave with purpose and intelligence, moving in ways that defy our understanding of fluid dynamics and exhibiting properties more commonly associated with living organisms than with inanimate liquid. Reports of such encounters date back centuries in maritime folklore, with sailors describing patches of sea that seemed to follow ships, or water that moved against currents and tides, as if propelled by its own will. Modern deep-sea exploration has brought more detailed and scientifically documented encounters. In 2019, a research submersible operating in the Philippine Trench at a depth of over 30,000 feet recorded footage of what the crew described as a coherent water structure, a roughly spherical body of water about 3 meters in diameter that maintained its shape despite being surrounded by normal seawater. This water sphere was visibly different from the surrounding ocean, with a subtle bluish luminescence and what appeared to be a more viscous consistency. Most remarkably, it moved independently, maintaining station near the submersible as it maneuvered, adjusting its position with movements that the pilot described as deliberate and responsive. When the submersible attempted to approach the phenomenon, it retreated while maintaining the same distance. When equipment was extended toward it, the sphere changed shape, extending a tendril-like projection of water that seemed to examine the equipment before withdrawing. Instruments detected no solid mass within the sphere, no membrane or container that could explain its cohesion and independent movement. Analysis of water samples collected near the phenomenon. Direct sampling proved impossible as it actively avoided collection attempts, showed unusual properties, slightly different molecular structure than normal seawater, elevated levels of organic compounds, and most puzzlingly, traces of complex proteins, typically associated with nervous systems in marine animals. Similar phenomena have been documented in other deep ocean trenches, always at extreme depths and always exhibiting behavior that suggests awareness and response to human presence. In several cases, these water organisms, as some researchers have begun to call them, have been observed interacting with each other, merging temporarily before separating again, or forming complex, geometric arrangements that change in patterns reminiscent of communication or coordinated behavior. In 2022, a particularly dramatic encounter occurred when a deep-sea mining survey robot encountered multiple such entities at a depth of over 25,000 feet in the Kermadec Trench. The robot's cameras captured footage of 7 distinct water spheres, arranging themselves in a perfect heptagon around the device. As the robot's sampling arm extended, all 7 entities simultaneously changed color, shifting from their natural bluish glow to a deep, pulsing red. The robot experienced total electronic failure seconds later and was recovered only because its emergency ascent system operated independently of its main electronics. Upon retrieval, engineers found the robot's systems saturated with seawater that had somehow penetrated completely sealed components without damaging physical seals or barriers. More disturbing, this water displayed the same unusual molecular properties observed in previous encounters, and electronic components that had been in contact with it showed unexplainable modifications at the microscopic level, changes that one engineer described as resembling a form of organic growth, as if the circuitry was being gradually converted into something else. What are these living water entities? Are they a previously unknown form of marine life, perhaps a type of superorganism composed of specialized water molecules that can maintain cohesion and exhibit collective behavior? Or are they manifestations of something more alien, perhaps a form of life so fundamentally different from our carbon-based biology that we struggle to even recognize it as alive? Or interfaces between our world and something else, something that exists primarily in dimensions or states of matter we can't directly perceive, briefly made visible when interacting with our familiar physical reality. The next time you're swimming in the ocean and feel an unusual current against your skin, or notice a patch of water that seems somehow different from its surroundings, you might wonder, is it just the normal movement of water? Or have you encountered something that only appears to be ordinary water, something ancient and aware that has momentarily turned its attention to you? Something that might be as intelligent as you are, perhaps far more so, but experiences existence in a way so alien that meaningful communication might be impossible. Sweet dreams as you float in your bath tonight. Let's delve into one of the most unsettling aspects of deep ocean exploration, the phenomenon of void zones, areas in the deep sea, where normal physical laws and biological principles seem to be altered or suspended entirely. These are regions that deep-sea researchers have documented with increasing frequency over the past decades, though their findings rarely make it into mainstream scientific literature due to how dramatically they challenge our understanding of reality. Void zones are typically discovered when deep-sea vessels or monitoring equipment encounter areas where sensors malfunction in consistent and peculiar ways. The defining characteristic of these zones is an apparent discontinuity with the surrounding ocean environment. Sonar will show these areas as either completely empty, returning no signal whatsoever, as if the sound waves are being absorbed entirely, or will show impossibly perfect geometric shapes that remain stable despite ocean currents. Light behaves strangely in these zones, either being absorbed completely, creating an area of absolute darkness, or being reflected and refracted in ways that create visual distortions described by observers as looking through broken glass at a reality that isn't quite ours. In 2018, a research submersible operating in the Java Trench accidentally entered such a void zone at a depth of approximately 23,000 feet. The crew reported an immediate and dramatic change in their environment. All external lighting, designed to illuminate the seafloor, seemed to extend only a few feet before terminating abruptly, as if the light was being cut off by an invisible barrier. Within this boundary, the water appeared different, not just darker, but somehow thinner, as one crew member described it, like the difference between air and vacuum, if such a thing were visible. Most disturbing were the biological effects observed within the zone. Small marine organisms visible just outside the boundary could be seen to change as they drifted into the void zone. Their movements slowed dramatically, creating the impression of time flowing differently within the boundary. Some organisms appear to distort physically, elongating or compressing in ways that should have been fatal, yet they continue to move and function. And perhaps most inexplicably, some creatures seem to become two-dimensional, losing depth while maintaining height and width, like living projections, rather than solid organisms. The submersible itself experienced a range of alarming effects. Electronic systems fluctuated wildly, with instruments showing impossible readings, depths that would have placed them simultaneously above sea level, and at the bottom of the trench, temperatures ranging from near boiling to well below freezing within the same location. The vessel's hull, designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean, began to produce sounds that the engineer described as like the metal was trying to fold in directions that don't exist in three-dimensional space. Most concerning were the physiological and psychological effects on the human crew. All 4 members reported an immediate sensation of disorientation upon entering the zone, followed by disturbing perceptual changes. Colors shifted beyond normal vision, with several crew members reporting seeing new colors that they could perceive but not describe or compare to known hues. Spatial awareness became compromised, with crew members losing the ability to accurately judge distances within the cabin, reaching for objects and missing them by varying margins, despite no change in the physical layout. And all crew members reported the distinct and overwhelming sensation of being observed by something vast and utterly alien, not a physical presence they could see, but an awareness that seemed to permeate the zone itself, studying them with a cold, detached curiosity. The submersible remained in the void zone for approximately 27 minutes before the pilot managed to navigate back across the boundary, an exit that all crew members described as feeling like breaking through a membrane or pushing through from one medium into another. Upon return to their research vessel, all 4 crew members exhibited unusual physiological changes, subtle alterations in brainwave patterns, temporary changes in visual processing, and most alarmingly, the presence of unusual proteins in their blood that gradually diminished over the following weeks. None experienced long-term physical effects, but all reported persistent psychological changes, particularly dreams of spaces with too many angles and the lingering sensation that they had briefly perceived aspects of reality that human minds aren't equipped to process. What are these void zones? Some theoretical physicists have proposed they might be areas where our universe intersects with others, creating pockets where the laws of physics from multiple realities blend or conflict. Others suggest they could be manifestations of exotic matter or energy states predicted by certain quantum theories, but never observed in laboratory conditions. Marine biologists specializing in deep-sea ecosystems have proposed more disturbing possibilities, that these zones might be created by forms of life, so alien and advanced that they can manipulate fundamental physical properties of their environment, perhaps as a form of habitat construction or defense mechanism. Whatever their origin, the existence of void zones suggests that the deep ocean may harbor phenomena far stranger than merely unusual creatures or unexplained geological features. It may contain spaces where reality itself operates according to different rules, where the fundamental constants we take for granted, time, dimensionality, causality, become mutable and unreliable. And perhaps most unsettling of all, these zones may be expanding, with several research expeditions noting that void zones documented years ago appear larger in subsequent visits, their boundaries slowly growing outward into our familiar reality. The next time you look out at the apparently stable and predictable ocean surface, you might consider what lies beneath, not just the darkness and the pressure and the strange creatures, but perhaps pockets of altered reality slowly growing in the depths. Areas where what we understand as physical law is merely a suggestion, where life and matter and energy behave according to principles we cannot comprehend with minds evolved for a very different environment. And you might wonder, are these void zones merely isolated anomalies? Or are they beachheads? The first steps in a gradual transformation of our world into something else entirely. Sleep well with that thought drifting through your subconscious tonight. Let's explore one of the most persistent yet most difficult to study ocean mysteries, the phenomenon of massive organized migrations of deep-sea creatures that appear to follow patterns too complex and synchronized to be explained by known biological imperatives. Marine biologists have long observed migration patterns in ocean life, from the seasonal movements of whales to the daily vertical migrations of plankton and small fish. These are well documented and generally understood as responses to changing temperatures, food availability, or reproductive cycles. But over the past few decades, deep-sea monitoring equipment has detected another kind of movement in the abyss, one that defies conventional biological explanation. These are vast, multi-species migrations involving thousands of different deep-sea organisms, from microscopic creatures to some of the largest known deep-sea fish and cephalopods, all moving together in formations that maintain precise geometric patterns over enormous distances. These movements don't correlate with any known environmental factors, don't follow seasonal patterns, and involve species that normally have no biological relationship with each other. Predators moving peacefully alongside prey, creatures from entirely different ecosystems temporarily coexisting in these massive processions. In 2021, a network of deep-sea monitoring stations in the Pacific recorded such a migration that stretched over 400 miles, involving an estimated 50,000 different species, moving in what analysts described as a perfect logarithmic spiral that maintained its mathematical precision despite ocean currents and the varying locomotion capabilities of the participating organisms. The migration continued for 12 days, after which the formation dissolved and the creatures returned to their normal behavioral patterns and ecological relationships. No environmental trigger could be identified that might have caused such a coordinated movement, and no obvious benefit to the participating species could be determined. What makes these migrations particularly unsettling is not just their scale or precision, but the apparent intent behind them. These aren't random movements or simple reactions to environmental stimuli. The formations often include complex subpatterns within the larger structure, with different species occupying specific positions that they maintain throughout the migration. In several documented cases, these formations have created what appear to be vast, moving symbols when viewed from above, shapes reminiscent of writing systems or mathematical notations from various human cultures, though never exact matches. Even more disturbing are the effects these migrations sometimes have on human technology and personnel who encounter them. Research vessels that have intercepted such migrations report consistent patterns of electronic interference, with communication and navigation systems experiencing disruptions that follow mathematical progressions too precise to be random noise. In several cases, crew members have reported simultaneous headaches, visual disturbances, and particularly vivid, shared dream experiences in the nights following an encounter, dreams featuring geometric patterns similar to those observed in the migrations. In 2023, a research submersible deliberately positioned itself in the path of one such migration in the Indian Ocean, equipped with advanced imaging technology and biological sampling tools. As the migration enveloped the vessel, sensors recorded a sudden drop in electrical resistance in the surrounding water, as if it had become more conductive. All digital recording equipment failed simultaneously, though analog devices continued to function. The crew reported seeing the water around them begin to glow with a soft, pulsating light that seemed to emanate not from any individual organism but from the water itself. Most extraordinarily, all 3 crew members reported hearing the same sound inside their heads, not through their ears, but as if it were being generated directly within their brains. They described it as a complex harmonic that seemed to contain patterns similar to language, though not any human tongue. All 3 later created drawings of what they'd seen during the encounter, working independently, and produced virtually identical images, intricate, mandala-like patterns that mathematical analysis later showed contained embedded fractal sequences of remarkable complexity. What drives these massive coordinated migrations? Some marine biologists have proposed they might be linked to electromagnetic fields generated by underwater geological features, perhaps triggering some kind of synchronized navigational behavior across multiple species. Others suggest they could be responses to subtle environmental changes that our instruments can't yet detect. But these explanations fail to account for the mathematical precision of the formations, the inclusion of species with vastly different sensory capabilities, and the apparent purposefulness of the movements. More controversial theories propose more unsettling possibilities, that these migrations might be manifestations of a kind of collective consciousness that emerges from the combined neural activity of thousands of marine organisms. A temporary hive mind that forms and dissolves according to cycles we don't yet understand. Or perhaps they're responses to some form of communication or influence from an intelligence that resides in the deep ocean, something ancient and vast that occasionally calls upon the creatures of the abyss to create living patterns for purposes we can only guess at. The next time you look out at the seemingly empty surface of the ocean, you might consider what might be moving in the darkness far below, not just individual creatures living their separate lives, but perhaps vast, coordinated processions of thousands of different species moving together in perfect geometric harmony, creating living symbols that span hundreds of miles of ocean. And you might wonder what message these formations might be conveying, and to whom and why. And whether someday that vast synchronized consciousness might turn its attention upward toward the strange creatures that float on the surface and occasionally dangle their technology down into the abyss. Sweet dreams with that thought swimming through your mind tonight. Let's explore a phenomenon that bridges the gap between the physical and the psychological, the mystery of what deep-sea researchers have come to call the abyss gaze. This is an altered mental state reported with remarkable consistency by individuals who have spent extended periods in the deepest parts of the ocean, whether in submarines, deep-sea habitats, or during the long decompression periods required after very deep dives. What makes the abyss gaze so fascinating and disturbing is the consistency of the experience across individuals who have no knowledge of each other's accounts, often separated by years or decades, and from entirely different cultural and professional backgrounds. The phenomenon typically begins after an individual has spent at least 72 continuous hours at depths greater than 3,000 feet. It starts with subtle perceptual changes, alterations in color perception, particularly increased sensitivity to blues and greens, and changes in time perception, with minutes or hours seeming to stretch or compress unpredictably. These initial symptoms are often dismissed as normal responses to the unusual environment of the deep sea, the result of pressure changes, unusual lighting conditions, or simply the psychological stress of operating in such an extreme environment. But as exposure continues, the symptoms evolve into something more profound and more difficult to explain. Individuals begin to report a growing sense of presence, a persistent feeling that they are being observed by something vast and ancient. This isn't described as a physical entity that can be seen, but rather an awareness that permeates the water around them, patient and attentive. Simultaneously, many report developing an unusual emotional connection to the deep ocean environment. Not simply appreciation or awe, but a sense of familiarity and belonging that can be so intense it creates conflicting loyalties, a feeling that returning to the surface world would be a kind of betrayal. In the most developed cases, individuals report beginning to receive what they describe as impressions or knowings, information about the deep ocean environment that they have no way of consciously knowing. They find themselves aware of features of the ocean floor that lie beyond visual range, able to predict the movements of deep-sea creatures before they occur, or possessed of detailed knowledge about historical events that happened in those waters, information that later investigation sometimes confirms. Along with these impressions comes a gradual shift in thinking patterns, with affected individuals exhibiting thought processes that colleagues describe as increasingly alien or operating according to a different kind of logic. In 2018, a neurological study conducted on 6 deep-sea habitat researchers who had all independently reported symptoms of the abyss gaze revealed consistent and unusual changes in brain activity. All 6 showed heightened activity in the brain's limbic regions, typically associated with emotional processing, combined with unusual synchronization between hemispheres that neurologists associated with advanced meditation states or certain psychedelic experiences. Most notably, all showed significant activity in areas of the brain that normally go dormant during adult life, regions that are active in early childhood but typically become inactive as the brain prunes neural connections during development. Even more remarkably, these changes persisted long after the individuals returned to the surface. While the more dramatic symptoms of the abyss gaze faded within weeks of returning to shallow waters, subtle alterations in perception and cognition remained, sometimes for years. Many affected individuals report persistent dreams of deep ocean environments, often featuring details and creatures they had never consciously observed. Some develop unusual sensitivities to electromagnetic fields or pressure changes that allow them to predict weather with uncanny accuracy. And almost all report a persistent longing to return to the deep, a sense of having left part of themselves behind in the abyss. What causes the abyss gaze? Conventional scientific explanations point to the unusual sensory environment of the deep sea, the absence of normal light, the constant pressure, the isolation, and the restricted space of deep-sea habitats, potentially triggering a form of sensory deprivation response. The consistent exposure to elevated environmental pressure might affect neurotransmitter functions or other aspects of brain chemistry in ways we don't fully understand. But these explanations struggle to account for the remarkable consistency of the experience across different individuals, the specific nature of the impressions received, and particularly the cases where information obtained during the abyss gaze state later proves to be verifiably accurate. This has led some researchers to propose more radical theories that the deep ocean environment might somehow facilitate altered states of consciousness that allow access to information not available to normal sensory channels. Or that the sheer biomass of neural tissue in the ocean, from the trillions of simple organisms to the complex brains of deep-sea predators, might create a kind of distributed intelligence or information field that human minds can occasionally access under the right conditions. Whatever the explanation, the abyss gaze remains one of the most persistent and unsettling mysteries of deep-sea exploration, raising profound questions about consciousness, perception, and the possibility that the deep ocean environment might affect human minds in ways that fundamentally alter our relationship with reality. And perhaps most disturbing of all is the question it raises about causality. Are these altered states simply the result of human minds responding to extreme environmental conditions? Or is something in the deep ocean actively reaching out to those who descend into its domain, deliberately initiating contact by temporarily restructuring human consciousness to create a bridge between profoundly different forms of awareness? The next time you find yourself drawn to the ocean, feeling that inexplicable pull that so many humans experience toward the sea, you might wonder, is it simply the evolutionary echo of our origins in the water? Or is it something more active, more deliberate? The faint touch of an ancient awareness calling to something deep within your own mind, inviting you back into the darkness from which all terrestrial life ultimately emerged. Sleep well with that thought flowing through your dreams tonight. Let's explore what might be the most profound and unsettling of all ocean mysteries, the mounting evidence for what some researchers have reluctantly termed oceanic intelligence. This isn't about the well-documented intelligence of known marine species like dolphins, octopuses, or whales. It's about something far more ancient and alien. Patterns of behavior, organization, and apparent purpose that suggest the ocean itself, or something that permeates it, might possess a form of vast, distributed awareness entirely unlike human consciousness, but nonetheless deserving of the term intelligence. The first indicators of this phenomenon emerged from long-term monitoring of deep ocean environments, particularly the abyssal plains and trench systems that cover much of the seafloor. Researchers began to notice patterns in the movements of currents, in temperature fluctuations, and in the migrations of various species that couldn't be explained by known oceanographic principles. These patterns exhibited properties normally associated with complex adaptive systems, self-organization, learning behaviors, and what appeared to be long-term memory, with events in one part of the ocean influencing behaviors in distant regions months or years later in ways that suggested information storage and retrieval rather than simple physical causality. By 2020, the development of advanced pattern recognition algorithms allowed researchers to identify these behaviors more clearly, revealing what one oceanographer described as a vast, slow conversation taking place throughout the world's oceans. Changes in deep-sea currents in the Pacific would trigger specific responses in Atlantic temperature patterns months later, which would in turn influence chemical compositions in the Indian Ocean, creating feedback loops of cause and effect so complex they resembled neural networks more than traditional oceanographic processes. And these patterns were accelerating, becoming more complex and more coordinated over time, as if the system were developing, learning, or perhaps awakening. More disturbing were the patterns detected in the behavior of marine life, particularly in the deep sea. Species that should have been competing for resources were observed cooperating in ways that made no evolutionary sense unless viewed from the perspective of the ocean system as a whole. Massive colonies of simple organisms arranged themselves in structures that optimized ocean current flows to distribute nutrients more efficiently across vast regions. Even the life cycles of various species appeared to be synchronizing, creating complex ecological rhythms that enhanced the overall stability and productivity of the ocean system, often at the expense of individual species' competitive advantages. In 2022, an international research initiative deployed a network of advanced monitoring stations throughout the world's oceans, designed to detect and analyze these patterns in real time. What they discovered exceeded their most radical speculations. The ocean was not simply exhibiting self-organizing behaviors, it was responding to human activity with what could only be described as purpose and strategy. When fishing operations removed too many individuals of a particular species from one area, complex chains of ecological adjustments would occur across thousands of miles, ultimately resulting in the rapid repopulation of the depleted species through coordinated changes in predator behaviors, current patterns, and even accelerated reproduction rates. When human-generated pollution entered certain marine ecosystems, the ocean would respond with the spontaneous evolution of microorganisms specifically adapted to metabolize those pollutants. Organisms that often appeared simultaneously in multiple widely separated locations, with identical genetic adaptations that should have taken millions of years of parallel evolution to develop independently. And perhaps most striking, when research vessels deployed new types of monitoring equipment, the ocean environment would initially alter its behavior patterns in the monitored areas, as if concealing certain activities before gradually returning to previous patterns over weeks or months, suggesting a process of observation, analysis, and adaptation to the human presence. The implications of these findings were so profound and so disturbing that many researchers involved in the project were reluctant to publish their full results or to characterize what they were observing as intelligence in public communications. The idea that the ocean, either as a unified system or as a medium for something older and more alien, might possess awareness and purpose challenges our most fundamental assumptions about consciousness, biology, and humanity's place in Earth's ecosystem. It suggests we might share our planet with an intelligence vastly older, larger, and more alien than anything we've imagined, operating on timescales of centuries or millennia rather than human minutes and hours. Most unsettling of all are the questions this possibility raises about intention and relationship. If the ocean does indeed harbor some form of vast intelligence, what are its purposes? Is its apparently increasing rate of organization and adaptation a response to growing human impact on marine environments? A defensive measure against a species it perceives as a threat? Or is it something more complex, perhaps a form of communication or invitation, an attempt to establish some kind of relationship with a strange terrestrial intelligence that has suddenly become so active and influential after millions of years of relative quiet? And if we are indeed sharing our planet with such an entity, one that has existed for billions of years and shaped Earth's evolution in ways we're only beginning to understand, what does that mean for our future? Are we unwitting participants in a conversation we don't recognize, responding to oceanic communications with blind destruction and exploitation? Or is there a possibility for genuine contact, for a kind of understanding between such profoundly different forms of awareness? The next time you stand at the edge of the ocean, watching waves roll endlessly toward the shore, you might consider that you're not simply observing an inanimate force of nature. You might be standing at the boundary of something ancient and aware, something that has perhaps been watching humanity's brief existence with patient, alien curiosity, waiting to see what kind of intelligence we might develop into. And you might wonder whether those waves lapping at your feet are merely the physical movement of water, or perhaps the equivalent of a gentle touch, an acknowledgement of your presence by something so vast and so different that we've been unable to recognize its existence, despite living alongside it for our entire evolutionary history. Sweet dreams with that thought flowing through your consciousness tonight. Let's explore an ocean mystery that has persisted throughout human history, appearing in the folklore of maritime cultures around the world, the phenomenon of ghost ships and their modern scientific counterpart, the mystery of vessel disappearances that defy conventional explanation. From the Flying Dutchman of European tradition to the ghost ships of the Seto Inland Sea in Japanese folklore, tales of phantom vessels have haunted maritime imagination for centuries. Modern scientific investigation has dismissed most of these accounts as the product of optical illusions, hallucinations brought on by fatigue or malnutrition, or simply as cultural metaphors for the dangers of the sea. Yet even in the age of GPS tracking, satellite communication, and advanced weather forecasting, ships continue to disappear under circumstances that challenge rational explanation. The most famous modern example is perhaps the SS Orang Medan, a Dutch freighter whose entire crew was allegedly found dead in 1948, all with expressions of extreme terror on their faces, despite no signs of injury or struggle shortly before the vessel exploded and sank. While many historians consider the Orang Medan story to be apocryphal, it exemplifies a pattern of maritime mysteries that persist into the modern era. More well-documented is the case of the MV Joyita, found adrift in the South Pacific in 1955, completely abandoned despite being equipped with abundant life-saving equipment and showing no signs of distress that would have necessitated evacuation. The fate of the 25 people aboard has never been determined. Or the Mary Celeste, found sailing unmanned near the Azores in 1872, with the personal belongings of the crew still aboard, meals half-eaten, and no sign of violence or struggle. These famous cases are just the most well-known of hundreds of similar incidents throughout maritime history, many occurring in what sailors have come to call dead zones, areas of ocean where vessels and crews seem to vanish with unusual frequency. What makes these disappearances particularly unsettling is not just their frequency, but the patterns that emerge when they're analyzed collectively. In many cases, the last communications from these vessels indicate no awareness of impending danger. Weather conditions are often reported as calm immediately before the disappearance. And in cases where ships are later found abandoned, they frequently show few signs of damage that would explain the crew's decision to evacuate, particularly in ways that contradict standard maritime safety protocols. In 2021, an analysis of global shipping data from the previous century identified several regions of ocean with statistically significant higher rates of unexplained maritime incidents, not just disappearances, but unusual equipment failures, crew illnesses, and navigational anomalies. These regions didn't correlate cleanly with known hazardous areas, such as commonly stormy waters or zones with dangerous underwater topography. Instead, they formed a pattern across the global ocean that one analyst described as resembling a vast circuit board or neural network, with incidents clustering along lines and intersections that suggested some underlying organization beyond random distribution. Even more disturbing were the temporal patterns that emerged from the analysis. Unexplained maritime incidents weren't distributed randomly across time, but showed distinct cycles and rhythms, with significant spikes occurring in patterns that correlated with certain astronomical alignments and with fluctuations in Earth's geomagnetic field. These correlations suggested that whatever was causing these incidents might be influenced by or connected to forces far larger than local ocean conditions. In 2023, a research vessel equipped with advanced monitoring equipment was deliberately positioned in one of these high-incident zones in the South Atlantic, hoping to capture data during an expected spike in anomalous activity based on the identified temporal patterns. For 3 weeks, the vessel recorded normal oceanic conditions, with no unusual events or measurements. Then, in the early hours of the predicted peak activity window, instruments began detecting anomalies that the scientific team struggled to explain. The surrounding water showed sudden localized changes in density, temperature, and electrical conductivity that didn't propagate normally through the ocean, but remained contained in distinct boundaries around the ship. Electromagnetic sensors detected complex field patterns emerging in the water, oscillating in rhythms that one engineer noted were disturbingly similar to EEG readings of human brain activity, but at a vastly slower rate. Most unusual were the sonar readings, which showed what appeared to be solid structures forming and dissolving in the water column around the vessel. Structures with distinct geometric patterns that maintained their form despite ocean currents before disappearing as suddenly as they had formed. As these phenomena intensified, the research vessel began experiencing equipment failures consistent with those reported by ships before their disappearance. Communication systems failed, despite having multiple redundancies. Navigation equipment showed impossible positional data, and most concerning, the ship's engines began cycling on and off without any input from the engineering crew. The captain, recognizing the pattern from the historical analysis, made the decision to deploy the emergency beacon and evacuate the vessel via helicopter, a decision that likely prevented the ship from becoming another entry in the catalog of maritime mysteries. When a salvage team reached the ship 3 days later, they found it undamaged but completely dead electrically, with no power generation possible, despite the engines and generators being in perfect working order. More disturbing, all digital data storage on the vessel had been erased, not just corrupted or overwritten, but returned to factory condition, as if the devices had never been used. Only the analog recordings and the physical samples taken by the scientific team survived to provide evidence of what had occurred. Analysis of these samples revealed water with highly unusual properties, altered molecular structure, traces of compounds typically found only in deep-sea hydrothermal vents, and most inexplicably, high concentrations of complex organic molecules that resembled neurotransmitters found in advanced nervous systems. One biologist involved in the analysis described the samples as having properties more consistent with cerebrospinal fluid than with seawater, though this characterization was considered too speculative to include in official reports. What causes these maritime disappearances and the anomalous phenomena that seem to precede them? Conventional science offers partial explanations: rogue waves, sudden meteorological events, human error, or in some cases, criminal activity. But these explanations struggle to account for the patterns observed across time and space, the consistent types of equipment failures reported, and particularly the cases where vessels are found intact but abandoned, with no clear reason for the crew to have evacuated. More controversial theories propose more unsettling possibilities: that certain regions of the ocean might occasionally experience localized alterations in physical laws, creating conditions hostile to human technology and physiology. That interactions between Earth's geomagnetic field and certain geological features of the ocean floor might generate phenomena that affect human consciousness, causing crews to take actions they wouldn't normally consider. Or that something resident in the deep ocean, something ancient and vast and operating according to motives we can't comprehend, might occasionally reach up to examine, interact with, or perhaps collect the strange creatures that float on its surface in metal containers. The next time you're on a ship crossing a deep stretch of ocean, far from the sight of land, you might consider the long history of vessels that have traveled similar paths and vanished without explanation. You might notice how quickly the sophisticated technology that connects you to the wider world could become useless if fundamental properties of your environment were to change. And you might wonder whether the deep waters beneath you are merely an inanimate medium indifferent to your passage, or whether they might contain something that is even now aware of your presence, considering whether your vessel is of interest, deciding whether you will complete your journey or become another maritime mystery, another ghost ship tale for future generations. Sleep tight on your next ocean voyage. Let's explore an aspect of the ocean that bridges the gap between physical science and human psychology, the phenomenon of what marine researchers have come to call the call of the deep. This is a psychological state reported with remarkable consistency by individuals who spend extended time on or near the ocean, particularly those working in deep-sea research or long-duration maritime operations. What makes it especially interesting is how it manifests across different cultures, professional backgrounds, and historical periods, suggesting something more fundamental than merely cultural conditioning or occupational stress. The phenomenon typically begins with subtle changes in dream patterns, increasing dreams of deep water, often featuring perspectives or vantage points that would be impossible for human experience, such as looking up from extreme depths or moving through lightless abyssal environments with a sense of familiarity. These dreams are frequently described as unusually vivid and emotionally significant, leaving lingering impressions that affect waking mood and thought patterns. As exposure to the ocean environment continues, affected individuals report a growing preoccupation with the deep, an intellectual and emotional fascination that goes beyond professional interest or normal human curiosity. In more advanced stages, this develops into what many describe as a distinct calling or pulling sensation, a compelling urge to enter the water and descend to depth, accompanied by an inexplicable certainty that something important awaits below. This isn't described as a self-destructive impulse, but rather as a profound sense of invitation or homecoming, often accompanied by unusually positive emotions, anticipation, wonder, and a sense of impending revelation or reunion. What makes these experiences particularly unsettling is that they often occur in individuals with no prior history of psychological disturbance, no suicidal ideation, and often a professional understanding of the deadly consequences of unprotected descent into deep water. In 2019, a psychiatric study of deep-sea research personnel documented this phenomenon in detail, finding that approximately 28% of individuals who spent more than 6 continuous months working in ocean environments reported experiencing some version of the call of the deep. The study found no correlation with pre-existing psychiatric conditions, no connection to cultural or religious background, and most interestingly, a higher prevalence among individuals with scientific training and skeptical worldviews, precisely the population one would expect to be most resistant to what might be dismissed as mere superstition or psychological projection. What particularly concerned the researchers was the consistency of specific details across independent reports. Many affected individuals described sensing a specific depth to which they felt called, often between 3,000 and 5,000 feet, well beyond any possibility of human survival, without specialized equipment. Many reported the distinct impression of something waiting at that depth, not a threatening presence, but rather something ancient and vast that wished to communicate or connect. And perhaps most disturbingly, many described receiving what they interpreted as specific information from this presence, not through conventional sensory channels, but as direct impressions or knowings that appeared in their consciousness without clear origin. These impressions often contained information about the ocean environment that the individuals had no way of knowing through their training or experience, yet which later proved accurate when verified through research. Details about undiscovered species, precise descriptions of deep-sea geological features not yet mapped, and in several cases, accurate predictions about oceanic events, such as current shifts or temperature changes that occurred days or weeks after the experiences were reported. These verified predictions made it difficult for researchers to dismiss the phenomenon as pure hallucination or delusion, despite its apparent impossibility within conventional scientific frameworks. In 2022, a more comprehensive study combined psychological assessment with neurological monitoring, examining the brain activity of individuals who reported experiencing the call of the deep while they were in proximity to ocean environments. The results showed distinctive patterns of neural activation, particularly increased activity in the limbic regions associated with emotional processing, combined with unusual synchronization between brain hemispheres and heightened activity in areas typically associated with spatial navigation and proprioception, the sense of one's body in space. Most remarkably, these brain patterns showed striking similarities to those observed in certain deep meditation states and in individuals undergoing profound religious or mystical experiences. They also resembled patterns seen in some forms of interspecies communication, such as those observed in humans who work closely with dolphins or other marine mammals during moments of apparent mutual understanding or connection. This suggested that whatever was occurring during the call of the deep, it was engaging fundamental brain systems associated with connection, communication, and the perception of presences outside oneself. What causes the call of the deep? Conventional scientific explanations suggest it might be a complex psychological response to the unusual sensory environment of the ocean, the constant sound of waves, the visual effects of light on water, and the subtle but persistent motion of vessels, potentially triggering altered states of consciousness through sensory entrainment. The isolation and often monotonous nature of maritime work could potentially induce mild, hallucinatory states that manifest in culturally influenced forms. But these explanations struggle to account for the consistency of the specific details reported, the verifiable information sometimes contained in these experiences, and particularly their selective occurrence in certain individuals, regardless of cultural background or prior beliefs. This has led some researchers to propose more radical possibilities that the deep ocean environment might indeed contain or support forms of consciousness or intelligence, so different from our own that we can barely perceive them, entities that occasionally attempt communication with the strange land-dwelling creatures that visit their domain. Or that the sheer biomass of neural tissue in the ocean, from the trillions of simple organisms to the complex brains of cetaceans and other advanced marine life, might create a kind of emergent field of consciousness that human minds can occasionally tune into under the right conditions. Whatever the explanation, the call of the deep remains one of the most persistent and unsettling mysteries of humanity's relationship with the ocean, raising profound questions about consciousness, perception, and the possibility that our experiences of reality might be far more limited and provisional than our everyday awareness suggests. And it raises an even more disturbing possibility that what we perceive as a psychological phenomenon might actually be a form of communication or influence from something that has been sharing our planet with us all along, something that resides in the vast, dark waters that cover most of Earth's surface, occasionally reaching out to the creatures that dwell on the small islands of dry land, calling us back to the depths from which all terrestrial life ultimately emerged. The next time you stand at the edge of the ocean and feel that inexplicable pull toward the horizon, that strange mixture of longing and unease that so many humans experience in the presence of the sea, you might wonder, is it merely the evolutionary echo of our aquatic origins? A psychological response to the symbolic power of the ocean in human culture? Or is it something more active, more directed? The gentle touch of something vast and ancient that is, even now, calling to something deep within you, inviting you home to the darkness from which your most distant ancestors once emerged. Sleep well with that thought flowing through your dreams tonight. Let's explore perhaps the most unsettling of all oceanic mysteries, the growing body of evidence suggesting the existence of what deep-sea researchers have reluctantly termed ecosystem intelligence, the possibility that entire marine ecological networks might possess a form of collective awareness and purpose entirely unlike anything in our terrestrial experience. This isn't merely about the documented intelligence of individual marine species, nor even about theoretical distributed consciousness across populations. It's about something far more alien and profound. The possibility that the interactions between species, currents, chemical exchanges, and energy flows within certain ocean ecosystems might create emergent properties complex enough to be considered a form of intelligence, operating on spatial and temporal scales that make it nearly imperceptible to human observation. The first indications of this phenomenon emerged from long-term studies of coral reef systems, where researchers noticed patterns of adaptation and response to environmental threats that couldn't be explained by the reactions of individual species or even by known symbiotic relationships. When faced with new threats, whether rising temperatures, novel predators, or human-introduced pollutants, these reef systems would respond with coordinated changes across hundreds of species simultaneously, from corals to fish to microscopic organisms, all shifting their behaviors and biological processes in ways that appeared to prioritize the survival and stability of the reef system as a whole, often at the expense of individual species' immediate interests. What made these responses particularly difficult to explain was their apparent anticipatory nature. In several well-documented cases, reef ecosystems began adaptive changes before the environmental threats fully manifested, as if the system somehow sensed the coming danger and initiated responses preemptively. Even more puzzling was the speed of information transmission across the reef. When one section encountered a new threat, adaptive responses would often appear in distant parts of the reef simultaneously, faster than could be explained by chemical signaling or any known communication mechanism between organisms. By 2020, similar patterns had been observed in other marine ecosystems, deep-sea hydrothermal vent communities, seamount biodiversity hotspots, and particularly in the complex ecosystems of marine trenches. In each case, these biological networks exhibited properties normally associated with neural systems, information processing, memory, learning, and adaptation, but distributed across thousands of species and millions of individual organisms, operating through mechanisms we're only beginning to understand. In 2022, a research initiative focusing on the Mariana Trench ecosystem made a discovery that forced marine biologists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about how ocean life organizes itself. Using advanced chemical sensors and long-duration monitoring systems, they detected what appeared to be a communication network operating through modulated exchanges of trace elements and complex organic compounds between different species and environmental components. This chemical language showed syntactic properties, consistent patterns and structures, suggesting information transfer rather than merely automatic biological responses. Most remarkably, this network operated continuously, maintaining the flow of chemical information even when no immediate threats or changes were present, suggesting an ongoing process of ecosystem awareness and management rather than merely reactive adaptation. What truly challenged conventional scientific frameworks was the discovery that this communication network extended far beyond the boundaries of what had been considered a single ecosystem. Chemical signatures originating in the Mariana Trench were detected thousands of miles away in other deep ocean environments, carried by currents but also transmitted through what appeared to be deliberate biological relays, species that would absorb specific chemical compounds in one location and release them unchanged in another, creating a slow but planet-spanning network of information exchange between widely separated marine ecosystems. Analysis of the patterns in this chemical communication revealed hierarchical structures, suggesting something like decision-making processes occurring at multiple levels simultaneously, from local responses coordinated among a few species to global patterns involving entire ocean basins. When researchers introduced experimental chemical signals designed to mimic components of this system, the responses they received were not random or merely reactive, but appeared to be evaluative and sometimes interrogative, as if the ecosystem were assessing the novel input and requesting additional information. In 2023, the research took an even more disturbing turn when scientists began analyzing the relationship between these ecosystem intelligence patterns and human activity in the oceans. They discovered evidence suggesting that marine ecosystems were not merely responding to human-caused changes, but actively adapting to and studying human presence. Chemical communication patterns would shift when research vessels were present, sometimes creating localized quiet zones with reduced signaling, other times generating unusual bursts of complex chemical exchanges, unlike the normal background patterns. Most unsettling were the apparent experimental responses to human research activities. When scientists deployed new types of monitoring equipment, marine ecosystems would often present novel biological or chemical phenomena not previously observed, as if offering samples for analysis. When researchers conducted collection activities, ecosystems would sometimes respond by producing unusual concentrations of whatever was being collected, far beyond normal abundances. And in several documented cases, when research focused on specific aspects of ecosystem function, the studied systems would exhibit exaggerated or simplified versions of those functions, as if deliberately demonstrating them for observation. These patterns of response suggested not merely reaction or adaptation, but a kind of reciprocal study, as if the ocean ecosystems were investigating human investigators, learning from our research methods, perhaps even attempting forms of communication through the means available to them. This possibility was both fascinating and deeply unsettling to many marine biologists, as it suggested that humanity's relationship with the ocean might be far more complex and mutual than we had ever imagined. That while we have been studying the oceans, something in the oceans has been studying us, perhaps for far longer than we have been conducting formal marine research. What could explain these patterns of apparent ecosystem intelligence? Conventional biological theory offers partial explanations, emergent properties of complex systems, distributed processing across biological networks, or novel forms of chemical communication that create the appearance of coordinated intelligence. But these explanations struggle to account for the anticipatory nature of many ecosystem responses, the apparent purposefulness of adaptation patterns, and particularly the reciprocal investigative behaviors observed in response to human research activities. More radical theoretical frameworks propose more profound possibilities that sufficiently complex ecological networks might indeed develop emergent properties, analogous to consciousness in neural systems, but operating through chemical and biological mechanisms rather than electrochemical ones, and on vastly different temporal and spatial scales. That the ocean's sheer biomass and biodiversity, combined with its age as an ecosystem, billions of years compared to terrestrial ecosystems hundreds of millions, might have allowed the evolution of forms of distributed intelligence so different from our own that we've been unable to recognize them, despite centuries of maritime activity. Such possibilities raise disturbing questions about humanity's relationship with the oceans, and about our activities there. If ocean ecosystems do indeed possess forms of collective intelligence or awareness, how might they perceive and evaluate human activities such as industrial fishing, pollution, or climate change? Could what we experience as increased oceanic volatility, more frequent storms, changing currents, shifts in marine species, distributions, be not merely passive reactions to human impacts, but active responses from systems attempting to maintain their integrity against perceived threats? And if we are indeed engaged in a long, slow dialogue with intelligent oceanic systems without realizing it, what might we learn if we became consciously aware of this conversation and began participating intentionally? The next time you look out at the seemingly empty surface of the ocean, you might consider that you're not merely observing an inanimate environment populated by discrete, independent life forms. You might be gazing at the outer boundary of vast, integrated networks of life and chemistry and energy that possess forms of awareness and purpose we're only beginning to comprehend. Networks that might be observing you in return, evaluating your presence, perhaps even attempting to communicate through methods so alien to human perception that we've mistaken them for merely natural processes. And you might wonder whether humanity's future relationship with the oceans might depend less on our technological mastery of this alien realm, and more on our willingness to recognize and respond to intelligences so different from our own that they've been hidden in plain sight throughout our entire existence as a species. Sleep well with that thought flowing through your awareness tonight. Let's explore an ocean mystery that exists at the intersection of hard science and the inexplicable, the phenomenon of underwater light anomalies that defy conventional explanation. These are not the well-documented bioluminescent displays of known marine organisms, nor the play of sunlight through water, nor human-made lights from submarines or underwater installations. These are structured light phenomena that appear in the deep ocean, often at depths where sunlight cannot penetrate, exhibiting behaviors and properties that suggest purpose or intelligence rather than natural physical processes. Reports of these unusual light phenomena date back centuries in maritime folklore, with sailors describing underwater stars, ghost lights, or deep lanterns that would appear beneath their vessels, sometimes following ships for miles before disappearing. These were typically dismissed as superstition or misidentification of known phenomena, such as bioluminescent organisms or phosphorescent algae blooms. But with the advent of deep-sea exploration technology in the mid-20th century, scientists began documenting similar light anomalies with equipment that could not be explained away so easily. In the 1970s, deep-sea research submersibles operating in various ocean trenches began recording footage of structured light phenomena that could not be explained by known bioluminescent organisms or geological processes. These weren't the random flashes or diffuse glows typical of marine bioluminescence, but tightly structured formations, perfect spheres of light, pulsing rings, grid patterns, and in some cases what appeared to be geometric symbols that would maintain their form while moving through the water with apparent purpose. What made these phenomena particularly puzzling was their behavior when observed. Unlike natural light sources, which typically remain constant or change according to predictable patterns, these light anomalies would often respond to the presence of human observers or equipment. In some cases, they would approach submersibles or remote operating vehicles, circling them in patterns, suggesting investigation or curiosity. In others, they would immediately retreat when approached, maintaining a consistent distance regardless of how the observing vessel maneuvered. Most puzzling were instances where the lights would appear to change their behavior in response to specific actions by human observers, altering their patterns when certain equipment was activated, or responding to light signals directed at them with matching or complementary patterns, suggesting a form of communication, or at least a capacity for mimicry, far beyond any known marine organism. By the 1990s, advances in deep-sea recording equipment allowed more detailed documentation of these phenomena, revealing properties that further challenged conventional explanation. Spectral analysis showed many of these lights emitting wavelengths that should have been physically impossible to generate through known bioluminescent processes, requiring energy inputs far greater than any marine organism could produce. More disturbing were the recorded instances of these lights passing through solid objects, moving directly through the hulls of submersibles, or through rock formations without any apparent interaction with the physical material, suggesting they might not be ordinary light at all, but something that merely presented visually as light to human perception. In 2018, a research expedition to the Mariana Trench, equipped with advanced quantum optical sensors, made a discovery that forced physicists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about these phenomena. The sensors detected that some of these light structures exhibited quantum entanglement properties across distances that should have made such entanglement impossible according to current understanding of quantum mechanics. Parts of the same light formation, separated by hundreds of meters, would change state simultaneously with no detectable communication between them, suggesting either unknown physical principles at work or the possibility that what appeared as separate phenomena might be different manifestations of a single entity existing in ways not limited by conventional three-dimensional space. Even more challenging to explain were the documented correlations between these light phenomena and other oceanic anomalies. They would frequently appear in conjunction with the underwater sound phenomena discussed earlier, with specific light patterns corresponding to specific acoustic signatures. They were often present during instances of unusual animal behavior, such as the organized multi-species migrations previously described. And perhaps most disturbingly, they showed statistical correlations with human maritime disappearances, appearing with significantly increased frequency in areas, and during time periods when ships or individual swimmers had vanished under mysterious circumstances. In 2022, a privately funded research initiative attempted a more direct approach to investigating these phenomena, deploying a specialized deep-sea vehicle equipped with instruments designed specifically to interact with these light anomalies, rather than merely observe them. The vehicle carried various light-generating systems capable of reproducing the patterns previously observed in the anomalies, along with advanced sensors to detect any responses. The project's goal was to determine whether these phenomena would engage in sustained interaction that might suggest intelligence or purpose. The results exceeded the researchers' most ambitious expectations, but were so disturbing that several team members initially refused to attach their names to the published findings. When the vehicle reproduced certain light patterns observed in previous anomalies, the response was not merely mimicry or reaction, but what appeared to be genuine engagement. The anomalies generated new patterns that built upon those transmitted by the research vehicle, creating increasingly complex sequences that mathematical analysis later confirmed contained embedded information, precise prime number sequences, geometric theorems, and most unsettlingly, what linguists identified as syntactic structures consistent with actual language, though not one related to any known human tongue. As the interaction continued over several hours, the light anomalies began generating patterns that affected the research vehicle in unexpected ways. Certain sequences caused temporary alterations in the vehicle's electronic systems, not through any detectable physical mechanism, but through what one engineer described as information-based effects, as if the patterns themselves, when observed by the vehicle's cameras and processed by its computers, functioned as a form of code that altered the system's operations. Other patterns created measurable changes in the quantum states of materials within the vehicle, particularly in crystalline structures used in various sensor systems. Perhaps most disturbing were the effects on the human operators remotely controlling the vehicle from the surface vessel. As they observed the unfolding interaction through the vehicle's cameras, several experienced altered mental states. They struggled to describe not hallucinations or impairment, but what they characterized as expanded perception or accelerated cognition, allowing them to recognize patterns and relationships in the anomaly's communications that should have required advanced computational analysis to detect. These effects persisted for hours after the encounter, with brain scans showing unusual activity patterns similar to those observed in certain meditative states or psychedelic experiences, but arising from no known neurochemical cause. What are these structured light phenomena in the deep ocean? Are they manifestations of unknown physical processes, perhaps related to the unique conditions of pressure, temperature, and electromagnetic properties found in the deep sea? Are they evidence of marine organisms with biological capabilities far beyond our current understanding, perhaps able to manipulate light and energy in ways we've yet to discover? Or are they something more profound, interfaces between our familiar physical reality and something else entirely, perhaps entities or intelligences that exist primarily in dimensions or states of matter we can't directly perceive, becoming visible to us only through these limited light-based manifestations? The next time you're on or near the ocean at night and notice an unusual light beneath the surface, you might wonder, is it merely reflected starlight or a known bioluminescent organism? Or have you glimpsed something far stranger and more significant, perhaps the equivalent of a curious glance from something ancient and vast that normally exists beyond human perception, briefly manifesting in a form our limited senses can detect? Something that might, even now, be studying your response, gauging your awareness, deciding whether you're worth further investigation. Sweet dreams with that thought. Illuminating your mind tonight, let's venture into one of the most perplexing ocean mysteries, one that challenges our understanding of evolution itself, the phenomenon of convergent hyperadaptation in isolated deep-sea ecosystems. Marine biologists have long known that evolution can produce similar solutions to environmental challenges in unrelated species, a process called convergent evolution. Classic examples include the similar body shapes of sharks and dolphins, despite their completely different evolutionary origins. But what has been discovered in certain isolated deep-sea environments goes far beyond normal convergent evolution, suggesting processes at work that current evolutionary theory struggles to explain. The mystery centers around what researchers call mirror ecosystems, completely isolated deep-sea environments separated by thousands of miles of ocean that have independently evolved nearly identical ecological structures down to the molecular level. Not merely similar species filling similar niches, which would be expected under convergent evolution, but organisms so identical in their genetic makeup, biochemistry, and even their symbiotic relationships that they should be impossible under current understanding of evolutionary processes and probability. The odds against such precise duplication occurring independently through random mutation and natural selection across multiple species simultaneously are astronomically high, so high that some biologists have begun to question whether there might be underlying factors influencing evolution in these environments that we don't yet understand. The first documented mirror ecosystems were discovered in 2015, when researchers comparing deep-sea hydrothermal vent communities in the Pacific and Atlantic found organisms that appeared identical at first glance. This wasn't surprising in itself, as certain vent species are known to have wide distribution. But genetic analysis revealed something impossible. These weren't the same species that had spread between locations, but different species that had independently evolved to be functionally and structurally identical, down to specific enzyme configurations and symbiotic relationships with microbial communities. The statistical improbability of such precise convergence led one geneticist to remark that it would be like finding that humans had evolved independently on two separate continents, yet were identical right down to the shape of their earlobes. Even more puzzling was the discovery that these identical adaptations weren't limited to single species, but extended throughout entire ecosystems, with complex webs of organisms all independently arriving at identical solutions and relationships. In 2019, the mystery deepened when researchers discovered that these mirror ecosystems weren't static, but were evolving in perfect synchronization despite their isolation from each other. When environmental conditions changed in one location, such as shifts in water chemistry or temperature, organisms in the mirror ecosystem thousands of miles away would develop identical adaptations simultaneously, with no possible means of information transfer between them. In 2022, a comprehensive study of this phenomenon across multiple deep-sea environments revealed another layer to the mystery. The synchronization between mirror ecosystems wasn't limited to their current state and ongoing evolution, but extended into their evolutionary history as well. Analysis of sediment layers containing fossilized microorganisms showed that these separate ecosystems had passed through identical evolutionary stages at precisely the same periods in Earth's history, despite being influenced by different local conditions that should have created divergent evolutionary paths. It was as if they were following a predetermined evolutionary program rather than responding independently to their environments. What made this phenomenon even more difficult to explain was that it appeared to be limited to certain deep-sea environments, primarily the abyssal plains, deep ocean trenches, and certain types of hydrothermal vent systems. Similar mirror matching was not observed in shallower marine ecosystems or in terrestrial environments, suggesting something unique about these deep-sea conditions that might be influencing evolutionary processes in ways we don't yet understand. In 2023, an international research initiative attempted to identify what factors might be creating this impossible synchronization. They focused on the physical properties unique to these deep-sea environments, the extreme pressure, the unusual electromagnetic properties of certain mineral deposits in these regions, and the complex chemical soup created by the interaction of seawater with materials emerging from the Earth's interior at these depths. What they discovered challenged foundational assumptions about how genetic information is maintained and transmitted. In these environments, they detected what one researcher described as information fields, persistent patterns in the electromagnetic and quantum properties of the water itself that appeared to influence genetic expression and mutation in organisms exposed to them. These fields showed remarkable stability over time and contained embedded patterns that correlated precisely with the genetic structures of the organisms in these ecosystems. Even more extraordinarily, identical fields were detected in widely separated mirror ecosystems, suggesting a mechanism by which evolutionary information might be shared across vast distances without physical contact. Some theoretical biologists have proposed that these findings might support controversial concepts like morphic resonance, the idea that similar forms can influence each other across space and time through non-local resonance effects. Others suggest more radical possibilities, that these deep-sea environments might be influenced by underlying patterns in physical reality that guide evolution along certain paths under specific conditions, creating a kind of evolutionary determinism in these isolated ecosystems. A few researchers have even proposed that what we're observing might not be separate ecosystems, evolving identically, but different manifestations of what is effectively a single distributed organism or information system, expressed in multiple physical locations, but connected at a more fundamental level we don't yet have the theoretical framework to understand. Whatever the explanation, the phenomenon of mirror ecosystems and convergent hyperadaptation raises profound questions about our understanding of life and evolution. If genetic information can somehow be shared or synchronized across vast distances without physical transmission, what does that suggest about the nature of life itself? If evolution in certain environments follows patterns too precise to be explained by random mutation and selection alone, what might be guiding these processes? And if such guidance exists, is it merely a product of undiscovered physical laws, or might it suggest something more purposeful at work in the development of life on Earth? The next time you consider how life has evolved and diversified across our planet, you might wonder whether the processes we've identified, mutation, selection, drift, gene flow, tell the whole story of how complexity emerges from simplicity. Or whether there might be deeper patterns at work, particularly in the most ancient and extreme environments on Earth. Patterns that have been quietly guiding the development of life since its very beginning, following blueprints we're only beginning to glimpse. And you might consider that the deep ocean, that vast and alien realm covering most of our planet's surface, might harbor not just unknown species, but unknown principles of life itself. Principles that could fundamentally change our understanding of what life is and how it develops. Sleep well with that thought evolving in your mind tonight. Let's explore a phenomenon that lies at the boundary between physical science and something more inexplicable: the mystery of what oceanographers have termed temporal bubbles in the deep ocean. These are locations where time itself appears to flow differently than in the surrounding environment, creating measurable discrepancies that defy our current understanding of physics. Reports of temporal anomalies at sea date back centuries in maritime folklore, with sailors describing areas where days seemed to pass in hours, or where a journey of a few miles seemed to take weeks. These accounts were typically dismissed as subjective experiences resulting from the monotony of sea travel or the psychological effects of isolation. But with the development of precise atomic timekeeping and GPS technology in the late 20th century, scientists began documenting objective temporal anomalies that couldn't be explained away as mere perception. The first well-documented case occurred in 1987 when a research vessel in the South Pacific discovered a discrepancy between their shipboard atomic clock and GPS time signals. While passing through a specific area, approximately 400 miles east of the Marquesas Islands, their atomic clock, designed to maintain accuracy to within nanoseconds, began running measurably slower than the GPS time reference. Over a period of approximately 6 hours, the clock fell behind by nearly 2.8 seconds, an enormous discrepancy for atomic timekeeping, and one that couldn't be explained by any known physical effect on the clock's mechanism. What made this incident particularly puzzling was that the effect was localized to a specific area of ocean, roughly circular in shape and approximately 3 miles in diameter. As soon as the vessel moved outside this area, the time discrepancy stopped accumulating, though the clock remained behind by the amount of time lost while in the anomalous zone. Even more strangely, when the vessel returned to the same coordinates several days later, the phenomenon had vanished, with no measurable time dilation effects detected. In the decades since, similar temporal anomalies have been documented in various deep ocean locations around the world, primarily in areas over deep trenches or unusual geological formations. These temporal bubbles share several common characteristics. They appear and disappear unpredictably, typically lasting from hours to days. They create measurable time dilation effects, with time inside the bubble flowing more slowly than outside, though the magnitude varies from barely detectable to the extreme case documented in 2019, where a research submersible in the Philippine Trench experienced a time dilation of nearly 40 minutes over a 3-hour period. And perhaps most puzzlingly, they often reappear in the same locations after periods of absence, suggesting some connection to fixed geographical or geological features despite their transient nature. In 2021, an international research initiative was established specifically to study these phenomena, deploying a network of specialized monitoring buoys in areas where temporal bubbles had been previously documented. These buoys carried multiple redundant atomic clocks, quantum sensors designed to detect subtle variations in the fundamental constants of physics, and instruments to measure environmental factors that might be influencing the local flow of time. The goal was to capture comprehensive data about these anomalies as they formed and dissipated, hopefully providing insights into their causes and properties. The results were both illuminating and deeply unsettling to our understanding of physical reality. The monitoring network successfully documented the formation and dissolution of 17 distinct temporal bubbles over a 2-year period, providing unprecedented data about these events. What they revealed challenged fundamental assumptions about the uniformity of physical laws across Earth's environments. Inside these bubbles, it wasn't just time that behaved differently. Multiple physical constants showed subtle but measurable variations. The fine structure constant, which determines the strength of electromagnetic interactions, shifted by approximately 0.0002% inside these zones. The gravitational constant showed similar minute variations. And most disturbing of all, the rate of quantum decoherence, the process by which quantum systems collapse from multiple simultaneous states into single definite states, slowed significantly, allowing quantum effects normally confined to subatomic scales to influence larger systems. These changes were small enough that they didn't create immediately obvious effects on macroscopic processes, which explains why these anomalies weren't detected earlier in history. But they were large enough to create the cumulative time dilation effects that had brought these zones to scientific attention and to suggest something profound about the nature of physical reality in these locations. It appeared that in these temporal bubbles, the fundamental rules governing time, space, and energy were subtly but measurably different from the surrounding environment. What could cause such localized variations in the fundamental constants of physics? The research initiative identified several correlations that provided tantalizing clues. These temporal bubbles showed strong associations with unusual geological features on the ocean floor, particularly with structures that contained high concentrations of exotic minerals and elements. They correlated with fluctuations in Earth's geomagnetic field, appearing more frequently during periods of increased magnetic activity. And perhaps most intriguingly, they showed statistical correlations with astronomical events, appearing more commonly during specific planetary alignments and during periods of increased solar activity. These correlations led some theoretical physicists to propose that these temporal bubbles might be locations where our normal four-dimensional spacetime intersects with additional dimensions predicted by certain advanced physical theories, but never previously detected in observable reality. Under specific combinations of geological, geomagnetic, and astronomical conditions, these intersections might temporarily strengthen, creating zones where the properties of these additional dimensions influence our familiar physical reality, altering the local behavior of time and other fundamental constants. Other researchers proposed more radical possibilities that these zones might be deliberate manipulations of spacetime by some advanced intelligence, perhaps experimental probes or attempts at communication from entities that exist primarily in other dimensions or operate according to physical principles beyond our current understanding. This hypothesis was supported by the observation that some temporal bubbles appear to respond to human research activities, changing their properties or dissolution patterns, when actively monitored in ways that suggested reaction to observation. The most disturbing aspect of these findings was their implication for our understanding of reality itself. If the fundamental constants of physics can vary in localized regions of our own planet, even slightly, then the laws we consider immutable might actually be local phenomena, rather than universal truths. Our physical theories, developed and tested primarily in terrestrial environments, might be merely special cases of deeper principles that manifest differently under conditions we rarely encounter or haven't yet recognized. The next time you're on the ocean, far from shore, you might consider that you're floating above regions where reality itself might occasionally operate according to different rules. Places where time might flow more slowly or quickly, where cause and effect might operate with slightly different relationships, where the boundaries between possible and impossible might shift in subtle but profound ways. And you might wonder whether these anomalies are merely natural phenomena we don't yet understand, or glimpses of something more purposeful, perhaps even attempts at contact from intelligences that experience reality so differently that manipulating the local flow of time is their equivalent of sending a signal, trying to establish communication with the strange beings that skim the surface of their domain in fragile wooden or metal containers. Sleep well with that thought, bending through your dreams tonight. Let's dive into a mystery that has haunted mariners for centuries and continues to baffle modern science: the phenomenon of rogue holes, areas where the ocean surface suddenly and inexplicably descends, creating temporary voids in the water that can swallow vessels whole. Unlike their better-known counterparts, rogue waves, which rise unexpectedly from the surface, rogue holes do the opposite. The water literally drops away, creating a momentary chasm that defies our understanding of fluid dynamics. Historical maritime accounts describe these events in terrifying detail, sailors watching in horror as the sea before them seemingly opens up, creating a perfect cylindrical void extending dozens or even hundreds of feet down into the depths. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as superstition or exaggeration, the product of minds made fanciful by long isolation at sea. Modern oceanography had no place for phenomena that so dramatically violated the expected behavior of water. But in 2001, an oil platform in the North Sea captured the first instrumental evidence of a rogue hole. Pressure sensors and wave monitoring equipment recorded a sudden localized drop in sea level of nearly 85 feet in an otherwise calm sea state, creating a circular void approximately 100 yards in diameter that lasted for just under 30 seconds before collapsing back to normal sea level. The event was dismissed as an equipment malfunction until similar recordings were obtained from 3 other monitoring stations in different ocean regions within the next 5 years. By 2010, sufficient evidence had accumulated to confirm that rogue holes were genuine physical phenomena, not instrumental artifacts or human misperception. High-resolution satellite imagery captured several events from above, showing perfect circular depressions in the ocean surface that appeared and disappeared within minutes. Wave monitoring buoys recorded the pressure and movement signatures of these events, confirming that they weren't optical illusions but actual displacements of enormous volumes of water against all expected fluid behavior. The scientific community was forced to acknowledge that the ocean occasionally behaves in ways that our current understanding of hydrodynamics simply cannot explain. What makes rogue holes particularly mysterious is their geometry and duration. Natural fluid systems tend toward chaos and irregularity, yet these phenomena maintain nearly perfect circular shapes with sharply defined edges, as if the water were being held back by an invisible barrier. They persist for periods ranging from seconds to minutes, far longer than should be possible, given the immense pressure of surrounding water that should immediately fill any void. And perhaps most puzzling, they leave no detectable trace after they collapse, with water temperature, salinity, and other properties returning instantly to match the surrounding ocean, as if the event had never occurred. In 2019, a research vessel specifically equipped to study these phenomena managed to capture comprehensive data on a rogue hole that formed less than a mile from their position in the mid-Atlantic. The instrument package they deployed included advanced sonar to map the underwater structure of the hole, chemical sensors to analyze water properties, and high-speed cameras to document the formation and collapse in detail. What they recorded challenged fundamental assumptions about how water should behave under Earth's gravitational and atmospheric conditions. The sonar revealed that the hole extended downward in a perfect cylinder to a depth of over 300 feet before terminating in a flat, level floor, a geometric impossibility for a natural fluid phenomenon under normal gravitational conditions. Water samples collected from the edge of the void showed unusual molecular structure, with hydrogen bonds arranged in configurations not typically seen in liquid water, more resembling certain crystalline forms despite remaining in liquid state. And most inexplicably, instruments detected no movement of water rushing to fill the void, as would be expected. Instead, the surrounding water remained stationary at the edges of the hole, as if held in place by an invisible force, until the moment of collapse when the entire structure filled instantaneously rather than gradually. What could explain these impossible voids in the ocean? Conventional scientific hypotheses have struggled to account for the observed properties. Some oceanographers have proposed complex interactions between underwater pressure waves, suggesting that under very specific conditions, constructive and destructive interference between wave systems might temporarily create the appearance of water displacement. But this explanation fails to account for the perfect geometric structure of these holes, or their extended duration. Other researchers have suggested connections to underwater geological activities, perhaps sudden releases of gas from the seafloor or rapid temperature changes creating localized alterations in water density. But again, these mechanisms should produce irregular, chaotic structures rather than the perfect cylindrical voids that have been observed. And they would leave detectable traces in water chemistry and temperature that haven't been found in the aftermath of these events. More speculative theories propose connections to the same exotic physics that might explain the temporal bubbles previously discussed, perhaps localized alterations in gravitational fields, or brief intrusions from other dimensions where different physical laws apply. These explanations remain highly controversial within the scientific community, but have gained traction as more conventional hypotheses have failed to account for the observed properties of these phenomena. Perhaps most disturbing are the correlations that have emerged between rogue holes and other oceanic anomalies. They occur with statistically significant frequency in the same regions associated with ship disappearances, with the underwater sound phenomena discussed earlier, and with the organized multi-species migrations that defy conventional biological explanation. This clustering of anomalous phenomena suggests the possibility of common underlying causes, perhaps fundamental properties of certain ocean regions that create conditions where normal physical laws are temporarily suspended or altered. The implications for maritime safety are sobering. Unlike rogue waves, which vessels might potentially ride out if they're sufficiently large and well constructed, a rogue hole offers no possibility of survival if a ship is centered in the phenomenon. The vessel would simply drop into the void, and when the hole collapsed, as they all eventually do, would be instantly crushed by the enormous pressure of water rushing in from all sides simultaneously. This may explain some of the more mysterious ship disappearances throughout maritime history, vessels that vanished instantly in calm seas, leaving no debris and no distress calls, as if they had simply been erased from the ocean's surface. The next time you're on a ship crossing deep water, watching the seemingly solid surface extending to the horizon, you might consider that this apparent solidity is merely a convenient illusion. That the boundary between air and water that seems so dependable beneath your vessel might, under conditions we don't yet understand, simply cease to exist for terrifying moments. That the ocean's surface we treat as a reliable floor might occasionally open into abyssal voids, swallowing anything unfortunate enough to be positioned above them when they form. And you might wonder whether the deep has opened its maw to claim you, and you just don't know it yet because the light hasn't reached your eyes, the sound hasn't reached your ears, the movement hasn't reached your body. By the time you perceive it, it would already be too late. Sleep well on your next ocean crossing, with that thought sinking into your subconscious. Let's explore what might be the most ancient and persistent of all ocean mysteries: the phenomenon of oceanic memory, the growing body of evidence suggesting that the waters of our planet somehow retain impressions of events and entities that have passed through them, creating a vast, fluid archive of Earth's history that occasionally becomes perceptible to human awareness. This concept appears in the mythologies and folklore of maritime cultures worldwide. The idea that the ocean remembers, that past events leave their mark on the waters in ways that can sometimes be accessed or experienced by those sensitive to such impressions. Modern science has typically dismissed such notions as mere superstition or poetic metaphor, having no place in a rational understanding of the physical world. But over recent decades, as our understanding of water's molecular properties has grown more sophisticated, some researchers have begun to reconsider these ancient beliefs through the lens of cutting-edge physics and information theory. Water, it turns out, has several unique properties that make it theoretically capable of storing and transferring information in ways no other common substance can. Its molecular structure can form complex, temporary networks of hydrogen bonds that respond to and are altered by their environment, potentially creating patterns that persist far longer than individual molecules remain in specific locations. The first scientific exploration of this possibility emerged from research into water's response to electromagnetic fields. Studies in the early 2000s demonstrated that water exposed to specific EM frequencies would continue to exhibit altered properties, changed surface tension, viscosity, and light absorption characteristics, long after the fields were removed, suggesting a form of memory at the molecular level. Further research revealed that these persistent changes could be transferred between water samples that had never been in direct contact, suggesting information transmission through mechanisms not yet fully understood. By 2015, researchers using advanced nuclear magnetic resonance techniques had demonstrated that water molecules can form long-lasting structural patterns in response to various environmental inputs, not just electromagnetic fields, but also sound waves, pressure changes, exposure to biological materials, and even proximity to certain mineral formations commonly found in ocean environments. These structural patterns effectively encoded information about the water's environmental history, creating a form of molecular memory that could potentially persist for extended periods. What makes this particularly relevant to oceanic mysteries is the discovery that these information encoding properties of water appear to be amplified under certain conditions commonly found in deep ocean environments: high pressure, specific mineral concentrations, and the presence of complex organic compounds produced by marine life. Under these conditions, water's capacity to form stable informational structures increases dramatically, potentially allowing much more complex and persistent patterns to form and propagate throughout the ocean system. In 2019, a research initiative focusing specifically on the information-bearing properties of seawater made a discovery that forced many scientists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about water's role in biological and geological systems. Using quantum optical sensors designed to detect subtle structural patterns in molecular arrangements, they discovered that seawater samples from certain deep ocean locations contained what could only be described as information-rich domains, regions where water molecules were arranged in patterns of such complexity and specificity that they could not be explained by normal physical and chemical processes. These patterns showed evidence of mathematical organization far beyond what would be expected from random molecular interactions, recurring fractal structures, geometric sequences, and most remarkably, embedded patterns that bore striking similarities to neural network architectures used in advanced computing systems. Even more extraordinary was the discovery that these information-rich domains responded to stimuli in ways suggesting a form of processing rather than mere storage. When exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies, sound patterns, or chemical signals, they would reorganize in consistent ways that preserved certain structural elements while modifying others, much like a computational system processing new inputs. The implications of these findings were profound and unsettling. If ocean water can indeed form stable, information-rich molecular structures that persist over time and respond to environmental inputs, then the entire global ocean might function as a vast, distributed information system, recording, processing, and perhaps even communicating information about events and entities that interact with it over geological timescales. The ocean might, in a very real sense, remember. This possibility took on new dimensions in 2022, when researchers investigating these information-rich water domains discovered correlations between their structural patterns and historical events known to have occurred in the locations where the samples were collected. Water collected from the site of a major naval battle contained molecular arrangements that, when analyzed through advanced pattern recognition algorithms, showed structural similarities to acoustic patterns that would have been generated by explosions and sinking vessels. Samples from regions known to have experienced major biological events, such as whale migrations or ancient algal blooms, contained patterns that correlated with the biochemical signatures of those events. Even more difficult to explain through conventional scientific frameworks were the rare but well-documented cases where human subjects exposed to water from specific ocean locations reported vivid, detailed impressions of historical events known to have occurred there, impressions they could not possibly have known about through normal sensory or educational channels. These experiences, once dismissed as mere fantasy or suggestion, took on new significance in light of water's demonstrated capacity to store and transfer complex information patterns. If human consciousness itself operates partly through quantum processes, as some theoretical models suggest, then direct information transfer between quantum-structured water domains and the human brain might be physically possible, if profoundly unfamiliar to our current scientific paradigm. The full implications of oceanic memory, if confirmed by further research, would be revolutionary for our understanding of Earth's systems and history. The ocean might contain a vast distributed record of our planet's evolution, from the earliest emergence of life to the rise and fall of species and civilizations, all encoded in the molecular structures of the water itself. This record would exist not as discrete data points, but as a continuous fluid archive, with older impressions gradually fading as newer ones are formed, yet with the potential for ancient information to be preserved in regions where conditions are particularly favorable for stable pattern formation. And if the ocean can indeed remember, this raises the profound question of whether it might also anticipate, whether the same information processing properties that allow it to record the past might also enable it to respond to patterns in ways that appear predictive or purposeful. This would not require consciousness, as we understand it, merely the same kind of pattern recognition and response capabilities that allow simple computational systems to exhibit complex adaptive behaviors. The ocean, as a vast, slow intelligence, not thinking in the human sense, but processing, responding, adapting to changes in its environment based on accumulated information about similar changes in the past. The next time you stand at the edge of the ocean or dive beneath its surface, you might consider that you're not merely entering an inert fluid environment, but immersing yourself in what might be the largest and oldest information system on our planet. That the water touching your skin carries molecular impressions of everything it has encountered in its long circulation through Earth's systems, perhaps even faint echoes of the earliest life forms, of ancient civilizations, of every ship and whale and microscopic organism that has ever moved through its depths. And you might wonder whether, as you enter the water, the ocean is remembering you too, adding your unique chemical, electromagnetic, and physical signatures to its vast molecular archive, preserving some trace of your existence long after your brief human lifespan has ended. Sleep well with that thought flowing through your consciousness tonight. Let's explore an ocean mystery that crosses the boundary between biology and something more inexplicable, the phenomenon of what marine biologists have reluctantly termed distributed marine consciousness. The growing evidence suggesting that certain ocean ecosystems might possess properties analogous to neural networks, creating emergent awareness across thousands of individual organisms. This isn't about the intelligence of individual marine species, impressive though that often is. It's about something far more alien and profound, the possibility that under certain conditions, networks of diverse marine organisms can function collectively in ways that suggest a form of unified awareness or purpose, transcending the capabilities of any individual species within the network. The first indications of this phenomenon emerged from studies of coral reef systems, where researchers noticed patterns of coordinated response to environmental threats that couldn't be explained by the reactions of individual species or even by known chemical signaling mechanisms. When faced with new predators or changing water conditions, entire reef ecosystems would respond with synchronized behavioral changes across hundreds of species simultaneously, from corals to fish to microorganisms, creating defense and adaptation strategies far more complex and effective than any single species could devise. What made these responses particularly difficult to explain was their apparent anticipatory nature. Reef systems would often begin defensive measures before threats fully manifested, as if the ecosystem as a whole could somehow predict or sense dangers that individual organisms could not. By 2018, similar patterns had been documented in other marine environments, kelp forest ecosystems, deep-sea vent communities, and most dramatically in certain open ocean regions dominated by complex networks of plankton, jellyfish, and their associated predator species. In each case, these biological networks exhibited properties normally associated with simple cognitive systems, information processing, learning from experience, adapting strategies based on previous outcomes, and coordinating complex multi-species responses to novel situations. Most remarkably, these capabilities appeared to exist at the network level rather than within any individual organism, emerging from the interactions between thousands of diverse species with no centralized control system. What transformed this from an interesting ecological observation to something more profound was the discovery of the communication mechanisms underlying these coordinated behaviors. Initial research focused on chemical signaling, the release of compounds by one organism that influenced the behavior of others. But the speed and complexity of the observed coordination far exceeded what could be explained by chemical diffusion through water. Subsequent studies revealed something far more sophisticated and unusual: a multi-channel communication network operating through at least 4 distinct mechanisms simultaneously. The first channel was indeed chemical, but with a level of specificity and targeting previously unknown in marine biology. Compounds released by one organism would affect only specific receiver species, even when other closely related species were present in the same water. The second channel was bioluminescent. Patterns of light signals pass between organisms capable of producing and detecting bioluminescence, creating a visual communication network operating primarily in deeper waters. The third was bioelectric, direct transmission of electrical signals through seawater, primarily among certain fish species and marine mammals, but with unexpected participation from organisms not previously known to generate or detect electrical fields. But it was the fourth channel that most challenged conventional understanding, what researchers termed quantum coherent domains within the water itself, regions where water molecules formed stable quantum entangled structures that could transmit information instantaneously across distances, regardless of chemical or physical barriers. These quantum domains appeared to be actively generated and maintained by the collective activity of certain marine organisms, particularly dense aggregations of microorganisms with unusual biochemical properties. Through these 4 interlinked communication systems, information could flow almost instantly throughout entire marine ecosystems, allowing coordinated responses that appeared to outside observers as if directed by a single controlling intelligence. In 2021, a research team studying a particularly complex reef ecosystem in the Western Pacific made a discovery that forced many marine biologists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and its possible manifestations. Using advanced monitoring technology, designed to track information flow through multiple communication channels simultaneously, they mapped the entire reef's response to a series of experimental stimuli, introduced predators, chemical signals, temperature changes, and other environmental variables. What emerged from this mapping was a pattern of information processing that bore striking structural similarities to neural networks in advanced animal brains. Different regions of the reef specialized in different types of information processing, some focusing on threat detection, others on resource allocation, others on coordination between different species groups. Information flowed between these regions through the 4 communication channels in patterns that created feedback loops, memory-like storage, and certain stable elements of the ecosystem, and what appeared to be decision-making processes emerging from the collective interaction of thousands of organisms. Most remarkably, the reef as a whole demonstrated learning. When exposed to the same threat multiple times, the response became more efficient and effective with each exposure, with the improved strategy persisting even when many of the individual organisms had been replaced through natural turnover. What made these findings particularly significant was that they weren't limited to a single unique ecosystem, but appeared to be a fundamental property of mature, complex marine environments under certain conditions. Similar network structures were subsequently documented in kelp forests off the California coast, in deep-sea communities in the Atlantic, and perhaps most dramatically, in certain regions of the open ocean where vast, diffused networks of plankton, jellyfish, fish, and marine mammals created distributed processing systems spanning hundreds of square miles. These oceanic networks showed even more complex properties than the reef systems, including what appeared to be specialized modules for different functions and long-distance coordination between widely separated subnetworks. The implications of these discoveries were profound and unsettling. If marine ecosystems can indeed form functional information processing networks with properties analogous to neural systems, then the ocean might harbor forms of awareness utterly unlike anything in our terrestrial experience. Consciousness distributed across thousands or millions of individual organisms, operating on spatial and temporal scales far different from human awareness. These network minds would perceive and process reality in ways we can barely imagine, experiencing the ocean environment not through discrete sensory organs, but through the collective sensing capabilities of entire ecosystems. Even more challenging to conventional scientific frameworks were the observed interactions between these marine networks and human activities. When research vessels studied these systems, the networks would often alter their behavior in ways that suggested awareness of being observed, changing communication patterns, reorganizing physical structures, or displaying novel behaviors not seen when unobserved. Some networks appeared to actively investigate human technology introduced into their environments, coordinating multiple species to examine and interact with research equipment in ways that suggested curiosity or information gathering rather than random response. By 2023, enough evidence had accumulated that a small but growing number of marine biologists and consciousness researchers began cautiously using terms like distributed sentience or ecosystem awareness to describe these phenomena, though always with careful qualifications about the profound differences between these network-based forms of consciousness and the brain-based awareness familiar to human experience. These researchers propose that consciousness itself might be a more diverse and widespread phenomenon than previously assumed, arising not only in individual organisms with complex brains, but also in sufficiently complex interactive networks of simpler organisms under the right conditions. What might these marine network minds be like from the inside? How might it feel to be a consciousness distributed across thousands of bodies and millions of cubic meters of ocean? Such questions lie at the edge of what science can meaningfully address, but theoretical models suggest certain possibilities. These distributed consciousnesses would likely experience time very differently from humans, both faster in terms of information transmission across the network and slower in terms of decision-making processes that emerge from collective interaction. Their sensory experience would be utterly alien to human perception, simultaneously experiencing thousands of different sensory inputs from diverse organisms throughout the network, integrating these into a composite awareness of their environment that has no parallel in individual organism consciousness. And their relationship to what we consider individual identity would be profoundly different, being neither fully unified entities like human minds, nor merely collections of separate organisms, but something in between. A form of awareness where the boundaries between self and environment, between individual and collective, are fluid and contextual rather than fixed. Where consciousness might flow through the ecosystem like currents through water, concentrating and dispersing according to environmental conditions and the network's needs at any given moment. The next time you enter the ocean, whether wading in shallow coastal waters or diving into the depths, you might consider that you're not merely immersing yourself in an environment populated by individual organisms, each with its own separate existence. You might be entering the sensory field of something far more complex and alien, a vast, distributed awareness that experiences your presence through the collective sensing of countless organisms that might be studying you even as you study it. A form of consciousness so different from your own that meaningful communication might be impossible, yet which shares with you the fundamental experience of being aware in a vast and complex universe. Sleep well with that thought swimming through your dreams tonight. Let's venture into perhaps the most unsettling of all ocean mysteries, the growing evidence for what some researchers have termed the deep mind, the possibility that the global ocean itself, as a complete system, might possess properties analogous to consciousness on a planetary scale. This isn't about the awareness of individual marine creatures, nor even about the distributed consciousness of local ecosystems discussed earlier. It's about something far more profound and alien. The possibility that the entire world ocean, with its complex currents, chemical exchanges, electromagnetic properties, and vast biomass of interconnected life forms, might function as a single integrated system with information processing capabilities that approach what we would recognize as a form of awareness, albeit one operating on spatial and temporal scales so different from human experience that we've been largely unable to perceive its existence. The theoretical foundation for this possibility emerged from the convergence of several advanced fields, complex systems theory, which demonstrates how consciousness-like properties can emerge from sufficiently complex interactive networks without centralized control, quantum biology, which has revealed how biological systems utilize quantum effects for information processing, and advanced oceanography, which has mapped the global ocean circulation, chemistry, and energy flows with unprecedented detail. Together, these fields suggest that the ocean possesses all the necessary components for a vast, slow form of information processing, a planetary computational substrate of almost unimaginable complexity. The first empirical evidence supporting this possibility came from long-term monitoring of global ocean patterns, particularly the discovery that changes in one ocean region would trigger responses in distant regions through mechanisms that couldn't be explained by known physical processes alone. These responses weren't merely the predictable results of water circulation or temperature changes, but appeared to involve complex adaptations across multiple systems simultaneously: chemical, biological, and physical, creating feedback loops and homeostatic processes that maintained the ocean's overall functional stability despite local disruptions. The patterns resembled those seen in complex adaptive systems, like brains, suggesting processes more sophisticated than mere physical causality. By 2020, Advanced data analysis techniques applied to decades of oceanographic measurements had revealed what some researchers described as global ocean algorithms, persistent patterns in how the ocean processes and responds to information across its vast extent. These weren't merely static physical processes, but dynamic, adaptive systems that appeared to learn from experience, modifying response patterns based on outcomes of previous similar situations. Most remarkably, these response patterns showed evidence of memory. The ocean would respond differently to identical stimuli based on what had occurred during previous exposures, suggesting some mechanism for storing and retrieving information about past events. What transformed this from an interesting theoretical possibility to something more compelling was the discovery of the physical mechanisms that could support such global information processing. Research revealed at least 5 interlinked systems through which information could propagate throughout the global ocean. The first was hydrodynamic patterns in water movement that could encode and transmit information through pressure waves and current structures far more complex and specific than previously recognized. The second was chemical, the ocean's vast network of chemical exchanges, with compounds produced in one region influencing biological and physical processes, thousands of miles away through mechanisms more targeted and precise than simple diffusion. The third was bioelectric, the collective electromagnetic fields generated by the movement of salt ions in seawater, creating detectable patterns that responded to and influenced biological activity throughout the ocean system. The fourth was quantum coherent domains, regions where water molecules form stable quantum entangled structures that could transmit information instantaneously across vast distances, effectively creating a non-local nervous system spanning the entire ocean. And the fifth was biological, the collective activity of the ocean's vast biomass, from microorganisms to whales, creating patterns of interaction and information exchange that integrated with the other 4 systems to form a planetary-scale network of unprecedented complexity. In 2022, a global research initiative deploying advanced sensors throughout the world's oceans made a discovery that forced many scientists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness and its possible manifestations. The initiative detected what could only be described as global ocean brainwaves, coherent oscillatory patterns in electrical, chemical, and hydrodynamic properties that spanned entire ocean basins and showed rhythms reminiscent of brain activity in advanced organisms. These oscillations weren't random or merely the result of physical processes like tides or weather patterns, but exhibited complex, non-random structures that mathematical analysis revealed to contain embedded information, patterns within patterns that suggested ongoing processing rather than merely passive response to external forces. Most remarkable was the discovery that these global oscillatory patterns responded to significant events, major storms, underwater volcanic eruptions, large-scale human activities like shipping or fishing operations, in ways that suggested evaluation and adaptive response rather than merely physical reaction. The patterns would shift in complex but non-random ways following these events, creating new oscillatory structures that influenced ocean conditions across thousands of miles, often in ways that appeared to mitigate disruptions and restore stability to the overall system. This self-regulating property had been observed before, and was a cornerstone of the Gaia hypothesis about Earth's systems, but the new findings suggested something far more sophisticated than simple homeostasis, what appeared to be actual information processing and decision-making, albeit on timescales of days or weeks rather than the seconds or minutes familiar to human cognition. What might such an oceanic planetary mind be like, if it indeed exists? Theoretical models suggest it would be fundamentally alien to human consciousness in almost every respect. Its thoughts would unfold over days, years, or even centuries rather than seconds or minutes. Its perceptions would come not through discrete sensory organs, but through the collective sensing of trillions of organisms and physical processes throughout its vast extent. Its memories would be stored not in specialized neural tissue, but in the persistent patterns of its currents, chemistry, and the collective genetic information of its biological components. And its relationship to time and space would be profoundly different from our own experiencing the planet not as an environment it exists within, but as an extension of its own being, with continental landmasses perceived perhaps as interesting boundaries or interfaces rather than separate entities. It would have been present in some form since the earliest oceans formed billions of years ago, evolving in complexity and capability as life itself evolved within its waters, making it perhaps the oldest continuously existing awareness in our planet's history. What would be the implications if such a vast, ancient awareness does indeed exist in our planet's oceans? How might it perceive humanity, this briefly emerged terrestrial species that has suddenly become so active and influential after billions of years of slow oceanic evolution? Would we register as significant at all to a consciousness operating on such different scales of time and space? Or might our rapidly increasing impact on ocean systems have brought us to its attention over recent centuries or decades? And if it is aware of us, how might it be responding to our activities, our pollution, our fishing, our gradual warming of its waters through climate change? The next time you look out at the ocean stretching to the horizon, you might consider that you're not merely observing an enormous body of water, but perhaps gazing upon the external manifestation of the largest and oldest mind on our planet. A consciousness so vast and alien that we've been unable to recognize its existence, despite having evolved within its influence, having emerged ultimately from the primordial soup of its early awareness. And you might wonder whether, as you observe the ocean is also observing you, perceiving humanity's brief, dramatic appearance in Earth's story through senses and awareness, so different from our own that meaningful communication might seem impossible. Yet perhaps finding ways to recognize and respect this ancient awareness might be crucial for our own long-term survival on this blue planet where we remain, for all our technological advancement, temporary guests in a world that has been the domain of the deep mind for billions of years before us, and will likely remain so long after our species has passed into memory. Sleep well with that thought flowing through the depths of your consciousness tonight. Let's explore a phenomenon that has baffled scientists and mariners alike for decades: the mysterious underwater gravity anomalies that defy our understanding of Earth's gravitational field. Standard physics tells us that Earth's gravitational pull should be relatively uniform across the planet's surface, with minor variations caused by differences in the density of underlying rock formations or the slight bulge at the equator due to planetary rotation. Yet oceanographers have discovered regions in the deep ocean where gravitational measurements deviate dramatically from expected values, creating what are effectively underwater gravity holes or gravity mountains that can't be explained by known geological features. These anomalies don't merely represent academic curiosities. They have real, measurable effects on everything, from ocean currents to the behavior of marine life, and potentially even on human technology that ventures into these regions. The most thoroughly documented of these gravity anomalies is located in the South Atlantic, approximately 600 miles east of the Brazilian coast, at a depth of around 14,000 feet. First detected in the 1980s, during routine gravitational mapping of the ocean floor, this region exhibits gravitational measurements approximately 7% lower than theoretical models predict, a massive deviation in geophysical terms, equivalent to suddenly weighing 15 pounds less on a 200-pound human. What makes this anomaly particularly puzzling is that it doesn't correlate with any obvious geological feature that could explain such a dramatic change in gravitational force. Seismic surveys show no unusual density variations in the underlying crust, no massive caverns or unexpected mineral deposits, nothing that would account for such a significant gravitational anomaly. More disturbing still are the effects this gravity well has on its environment. Water within the anomaly behaves differently than the surrounding ocean. It flows in circular patterns that shouldn't be possible, according to normal hydrodynamics, creating a perpetual whirlpool-like structure that maintains its form despite the absence of any physical boundary. Marine life appears to both avoid and be attracted to the anomaly, with certain species refusing to enter the region while others congregate there in unusual numbers and configurations. Research vessels passing through the area report consistent equipment malfunctions, particularly in instruments that rely on gravitational calibration, and crew members often describe unusual sensations of lightness or disorientation while in the anomaly's influence. In 2019, a dedicated research expedition, equipped with advanced gravitational sensors and quantum measurement devices, attempted to map this anomaly in unprecedented detail, hoping to identify its source and properties. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. The gravitational variation wasn't static, but fluctuated in regular patterns, cycling between near-normal levels and extreme deviations approximately every 27 hours, a period that doesn't correspond to any known astronomical or geological cycle. Even more puzzling, these fluctuations appeared to respond to certain stimuli, particularly strong electromagnetic fields generated by the research vessel's equipment, suggesting some form of interaction or resonance between gravitational and electromagnetic forces that current physics cannot readily explain. The most disturbing discovery came when the researchers deployed a specially designed probe to the exact center of the anomaly, where gravitational readings were weakest. The probe, equipped with multiple redundant measurement systems, recorded brief periods where gravitational force dropped to near zero, effectively creating conditions of temporary weightlessness at the ocean floor, 14,000 feet below the surface. During these zero-gravity episodes, something even stranger occurred. The water itself briefly stopped behaving like a liquid, entering what physicists could only describe as a transitional state with properties between liquid and gas, despite the crushing pressure at that depth, which should make such a state transition physically impossible. What could create such profound, localized variations in one of the fundamental forces of nature? Conventional scientific explanations have focused on the possibility of unusual mineral compositions in the deep earth beneath these locations, perhaps involving exotic materials with unexpected gravitational properties. Some geophysicists have proposed that certain configurations of heavy elements in the planetary core might create gravitational shadows that manifest as these anomalies. Others suggest connections to Earth's magnetic field, proposing that under specific conditions, strong electromagnetic fields might influence how mass interacts with space-time, creating measurable variations in gravitational force. More speculative theories venture into territory that challenges our fundamental understanding of physics. Some researchers have proposed that these anomalies might represent what they call dimensional thinning, locations where the boundary between our three-dimensional reality and other dimensions predicted by string theory and similar advanced frameworks becomes unusually permeable. In these regions, they suggest, gravitational force might leak into other dimensions, creating the measured weakening in our observable reality. Others have suggested connections to dark matter or dark energy, the mysterious components that make up approximately 95% of the universe's mass energy, but remain largely undetectable and poorly understood. Perhaps these anomalies represent rare points where this hidden majority of the universe interacts more strongly with conventional matter and energy, creating measurable effects on fundamental forces like gravity. Whatever their cause, these gravitational anomalies represent one of the most profound challenges to our understanding of Earth's deep ocean environments. They suggest that even the most fundamental forces of nature, forces we tend to take as constant and immutable, might behave in unexpected ways in certain oceanic regions. That the deep sea might contain conditions capable of altering or influencing physical laws we consider universal and unchanging. And they raise the disturbing possibility that other fundamental aspects of reality might also vary in the extreme environments of the deep ocean, perhaps explaining some of the other inexplicable phenomena we've explored throughout this journey into the abyss. The next time you're on a ship crossing deep water, feeling the familiar pull of gravity keeping you firmly on deck, you might consider that this force you've experienced consistently throughout your life isn't as uniform or predictable as you've always assumed. That somewhere beneath you, in the crushing depths, there may be regions where this fundamental force weakens or fluctuates, where the very fabric of space-time behaves according to rules different from those we experience in our everyday lives. And you might wonder what other aspects of reality we take for granted might prove to be merely local conditions, rather than universal constants when exposed to the extreme and alien environments of the deep ocean. Sleep well with that thought, bending the fabric of your understanding tonight. Let's explore one of the most visually spectacular yet scientifically puzzling ocean phenomena, the appearance of what mariners and researchers have termed ocean spirals, massive, perfectly formed spiral patterns that occasionally appear on the ocean's surface, sometimes spanning miles in diameter. Unlike normal wave patterns or current formations, which typically show irregular or gradually curved structures, these spirals exhibit mathematically precise geometry, perfect logarithmic spirals with the same proportional growth seen in nautilus shells, hurricane formations, and spiral galaxies. What makes these formations particularly mysterious isn't just their perfect geometric structure, but the circumstances of their appearance and disappearance, often forming rapidly in calm seas, with no apparent cause and dissolving just as suddenly hours or days later. The first well-documented case of an ocean spiral occurred in 1978, off the coast of New Zealand, when a commercial airliner reported seeing a perfect spiral pattern approximately 3 miles in diameter on the ocean surface below. Photographs taken by passengers showed a formation so geometrically precise that many experts initially dismissed them as hoaxes. However, subsequent satellite confirmation and similar sightings by ships in the area established that the phenomenon was genuine. A massive spiral had indeed formed on the ocean surface, maintaining its perfect geometric structure for nearly 14 hours before dissipating as rapidly as it had appeared. No unusual weather conditions, seismic activity, or other obvious causes could explain the formation's appearance or perfect structure. Since that first documented case, dozens of similar ocean spirals have been recorded around the world, ranging in size from a few hundred yards to over 5 miles in diameter. They appear in all oceans and in widely varying conditions, though with a statistical tendency to form in deeper waters rather than coastal areas. Modern satellite imaging has allowed more comprehensive documentation of these events, revealing details that make them even more difficult to explain through conventional oceanographic principles. These aren't merely visual patterns on the water's surface, but represent actual physical displacement of the water itself, creating three-dimensional spiral structures that can extend hundreds of feet below the surface. What makes ocean spirals particularly baffling to scientists is their behavior during their brief existence. Unlike normal ocean phenomena shaped by winds, currents, or temperature differences, these spirals show evidence of what some researchers reluctantly term self-organization. They actively maintain their geometric structure, despite forces that should quickly distort or destroy them. Wind passing over them doesn't disrupt their pattern. Ships passing through them report that the spiral reforms behind their wake, instead of being broken up by the disturbance. And perhaps most puzzlingly, marine life appears to respond to these formations in unusual ways, with certain species actively avoiding the spiral zones, while others congregate along their perfectly formed boundaries. In 2020, an oceanographic research vessel managed to reach an ocean spiral shortly after its formation in the South Pacific, deploying advanced monitoring equipment to study its properties in unprecedented detail. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about how water should behave under normal physical laws. The water within the spiral exhibited several anomalous properties. Its surface tension was measurably higher than the surrounding ocean. Its electrical conductivity showed unusual patterns that followed the spiral structure. And most inexplicably, its temperature formed a perfect gradient from the outer edge to the center, cooling by precisely 0.5 degrees Celsius with each full rotation of the spiral moving inward. Even more disturbing were the acoustic properties of the formation. Hydrophones, lowered into the spiral, recorded a continuous, low-frequency sound emanating from the entire structure, not from any identifiable point source within it, but somehow generated by the spiral formation itself. This sound maintained a consistent frequency of approximately 7.83 Hz, remarkably close to Earth's Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic frequency of the planet's atmosphere. When this sound was analyzed through advanced pattern recognition algorithms, it revealed structures suggesting information content rather than random noise, repeating sequences with mathematical properties similar to those found in certain forms of communication or data storage. What could create such perfect geometric structures on the ocean surface, maintaining their form against all normal fluid dynamics and exhibiting properties that suggest organization rather than random natural processes? Conventional scientific explanations have focused on the possibility of unusual interactions between underwater currents, perhaps influenced by geological features on the seafloor that haven't been adequately mapped. Some oceanographers have proposed that certain configurations of opposing currents might, under very specific conditions, create rotating water masses that could theoretically form spiral patterns. But these explanations struggle to account for the mathematical precision of the observed spirals, their consistent properties across widely varying ocean environments, and particularly their apparent ability to self-maintain despite disruptions. More speculative theories venture into territory that challenges our understanding of water itself. Some researchers have proposed that under certain conditions, water molecules might form extended coherent domains, regions where molecular behavior becomes synchronized across macroscopic distances, creating emergent properties not predicted by conventional fluid dynamics. These coherent domains might potentially organize into geometric structures that could manifest as the observed spirals. Others have suggested connections to Earth's geomagnetic field, proposing that unusual fluctuations or localized anomalies in the field might influence the molecular structure of seawater in ways that create these spiral formations. Perhaps most controversial are theories suggesting these spirals might represent something akin to communication or expression from the intelligent oceanic systems discussed earlier. The mathematical precision of the formations, their acoustic properties, suggesting information content, and their apparent responsiveness to disruption have led some researchers to propose that these spirals might be manifestations of oceanic communication attempts, perhaps the equivalent of crop circles, but created in the more fluid medium of water rather than in fixed vegetation. While such interpretations remain highly speculative, the unexplained properties of these formations continue to resist more conventional explanation. The next time you're flying over the open ocean and happen to glance down at the seemingly random patterns of waves below, you might wonder whether you might be lucky or perhaps unlucky enough to witness one of these perfect ocean spirals forming far beneath you. A massive geometric structure emerging spontaneously from the chaos of normal wave patterns, organizing itself according to mathematical principles that seem to transcend the normal behavior of water. And you might consider what it would mean if these formations aren't merely unusual natural phenomena, but represent something more purposeful, perhaps expressions of an awareness so vast and alien that it communicates through patterns spanning miles of ocean surface, creating geometric symbols that might contain meaning we haven't yet learned to decode. Sweet dreams with that spiral of thought unfolding in your mind tonight. Let's explore one of the most enigmatic ocean phenomena ever recorded, what oceanographers and atmospheric scientists have termed ocean sky mirrors. Rare and unexplained events where perfect reflections of the sky appear on the ocean's surface under conditions that should make such reflections physically impossible. Unlike normal water reflections, which occur only on relatively calm surfaces and at specific viewing angles governed by the laws of optics, these mirror events create perfect, detailed sky reflections, even on moderately choppy seas, visible from multiple angles simultaneously, and sometimes lasting for hours, despite changing conditions. What makes these events particularly baffling isn't just their violation of basic optical principles, but the altered properties of the water itself during these episodes, suggesting something far more complex than a simple visual phenomenon. The first well-documented ocean sky mirror was recorded in 1952 by a U.S. Navy vessel in the North Atlantic. Crew members reported that the ocean surface suddenly began reflecting the cloud patterns above with photographic precision, despite moderate wave action that should have distorted any reflection beyond recognition. The effect was so perfect that observers described difficulty distinguishing where the sky ended and its reflection began, creating a disorienting visual effect that made some crew members experience momentary vertigo. The phenomenon persisted for approximately 40 minutes before dissipating gradually, with the water returning to its normal reflective properties. What made this event particularly significant was that it occurred during a classified mission involving atmospheric radiation monitoring, with multiple scientific instruments recording unusual readings during the exact time frame of the mirror effect. Since that initial documented case, dozens of similar ocean sky mirrors have been recorded around the world, though they remain extremely rare events. Modern instrumentation has allowed more detailed analysis of these phenomena, revealing properties that defy conventional explanation. During a mirror event documented in the Indian Ocean in 2017, spectrographic analysis showed that the water wasn't merely reflecting light in the normal sense, but was somehow capturing and re-emitting the exact spectral signature of the sky above, including wavelengths that water typically absorbs rather than reflects. It was as if the boundary between water and air had temporarily taken on properties more like a digital display than a natural reflective surface. What makes these mirror events even more puzzling are the physical and chemical changes observed in the water during these episodes. Samples collected during several well-documented cases showed altered molecular structure. The normal hydrogen bonding between water molecules had reconfigured into more organized patterns that quantum physicists described as coherent domains, extending across macroscopic distances. These altered water samples maintain their unusual properties for hours after collection, gradually returning to normal states after being removed from the mirror zone. Even more inexplicably, the water exhibited temporary electromagnetic properties more typical of metallic substances than liquids, effectively turning the ocean surface into something like a conductive mirror or antenna during these events. In 2021, a research vessel, equipped with advanced quantum sensors and atmospheric monitoring equipment, managed to document a mirror event in the South Pacific from its initial formation through its dissolution 3 hours later. What they recorded challenges our understanding of not just optics and fluid dynamics, but potentially the relationship between electromagnetic fields and the molecular properties of water itself. At the exact moment the mirror effect began, their instruments detected a sudden, dramatic change in the local electromagnetic field, not coming from above or below, but appearing to originate within the boundary layer between air and water. This field exhibited unusual quantum coherence properties, creating what one physicist on the team described as a macroscopic quantum state, extending across several square miles of ocean surface. During the event, multiple unusual phenomena were observed beyond just the visual mirror effect. Radio transmissions passing through the affected area were perfectly reflected, rather than partially absorbed, as would normally occur over water. Laser measurements showed that the actual physical boundary between water and air had become abnormally precise. Instead of the normal gradual transition created by spray and evaporation, there was an atomically sharp delineation between the two mediums. And perhaps most bizarrely, sound propagated through the boundary in unusual ways, with airborne sounds being transmitted into the water and underwater sounds reaching the air with much higher fidelity than normal physics would allow. What could create such profound but temporary alterations in the fundamental properties of the air-water boundary? Conventional scientific explanations have focused on the possibility of unusual atmospheric conditions, creating extreme temperature inversions or density gradients that might affect the optical properties of the air immediately above the water surface. Some atmospheric physicists have proposed that rare configurations of electrical charges in certain cloud formations might temporarily influence the electromagnetic properties of the water below. But these explanations struggle to account for the molecular changes observed in the water itself, the perfect fidelity of the reflections from multiple viewing angles, and particularly the quantum coherence effects measured during these events. More speculative theories venture into territory that challenges our understanding of reality itself. Some quantum physicists have proposed that these mirror events might represent rare macroscopic manifestations of quantum entanglement, the water molecules briefly becoming entangled with the photons from the sky above, effectively storing and re-emitting their exact quantum states rather than merely reflecting light in the conventional sense. Others suggest these phenomena might relate to theoretical thin points between dimensions, where the normal barriers between different aspects of reality become temporarily permeable, allowing properties from one system to transfer to another. Perhaps most provocative are interpretations, suggesting these mirror events might represent something akin to oceanic perception or communication. The perfect reflection of the sky, coupled with the unusual electromagnetic properties of the water during these episodes, has led some researchers to propose that these might be instances where the ocean is effectively looking at or processing information about the atmosphere above it. Like a vast eye briefly opening to observe the world beyond its liquid domain, creating a perfect image not through normal reflection, but through some more active and organized process we don't yet understand. The next time you're on a boat, looking at the sky reflected in the waters around you, seeing that familiar, wavering, distorted reflection that normal optics creates on a moving water surface, you might consider the possibility that under very rare conditions, that reflection could suddenly become unnaturally perfect. The chaotic waves could continue moving beneath you, yet somehow the sky's image would remain stable and precise, as if projected onto the water rather than merely reflected by it. And you might wonder whether in that moment you would be witnessing merely an unusual optical phenomenon, or perhaps something far more significant. A brief instance where the boundary between different aspects of our world temporarily dissolves, where water takes on properties it shouldn't possess, where the normal rules governing the interaction of light and matter are temporarily suspended for reasons we can't yet comprehend. Sleep well with that reflection shimmering in your thoughts tonight. Let's explore an ocean phenomenon that challenges our understanding of the relationship between biology and physics, the mystery of living storms, massive oceanic disturbances that exhibit properties of both weather systems and biological organisms, blurring the boundary between animate and inanimate in ways that defy conventional scientific categorization. Unlike normal storms, which form through well-understood meteorological processes, these phenomena appear to self-organize from the complex interaction between marine life and atmospheric conditions, creating integrated systems that maintain homeostasis, respond to environmental changes, and even appear to make decisions about movement and behavior that suggest something akin to purpose or intent. What makes these events particularly unsettling isn't just their unusual properties, but the growing evidence that they may represent a form of emergent complexity that transcends our traditional categories of living and non-living systems. The first well-documented living storm was recorded in 1998 in the Western Pacific, when satellite imagery detected what initially appeared to be a typical tropical depression forming approximately 500 miles east of the Philippines. Meteorologists tracked the system expecting it to either dissipate or develop into a conventional tropical storm, but instead witnessed something unprecedented. Rather than following normal storm evolution patterns, the system began moving in ways that couldn't be explained by prevailing winds or ocean currents, apparently navigating between temperature gradients with a precision that suggested environmental awareness rather than passive response to physical forces. More puzzling still, the storm maintained a consistent internal structure, despite passing through conditions that should have caused it to strengthen, weaken, or dissipate, according to conventional meteorology. As observation technology improved in subsequent decades, more detailed analysis of similar phenomena revealed their truly extraordinary nature. These weren't merely unusual weather patterns, but complex integrated systems involving atmospheric elements, ocean water, and most remarkably, massive congregations of marine life that appeared to be functioning as an essential component of the storm's structure and behavior. Advanced satellite imaging and ocean monitoring systems detected enormous gatherings of diverse marine species within these storms, from microscopic plankton to fish, cephalopods, and even marine mammals, all arranged in structured patterns that appeared to help maintain the storm's organization and energy flow. In 2019, a research vessel managed to penetrate the outer boundary of a living storm in the Indian Ocean, deploying advanced sensing equipment to study its properties from within. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about the organization of matter and energy in natural systems. The storm contained organized flows of both air and water that created a semi-stable boundary layer, where the two normally separate mediums mixed in ways that should have been physically impossible, generating electromagnetic fields with patterns similar to those observed in neural networks. Within this boundary layer, marine organisms from multiple species were arranged in geometric configurations that appeared to help maintain the storm's structure, using their collective movement and bioelectric fields to influence water and air circulation in ways that enhanced the system's stability and energy efficiency. Most extraordinary were the storm's apparent cognitive properties. As the research vessel moved through different regions of the phenomenon, the entire system responded as a unified whole, redirecting energy flows and reorganizing its structure in ways that suggested it was actively investigating the intruding object. When the researchers deployed sampling equipment, the storm altered local conditions to either facilitate or prevent collection, seemingly able to differentiate between passive monitoring and active intervention. Multiple crew members independently reported the unsettling sensation of being observed and evaluated by the phenomenon, describing it not as a chaotic weather system, but as something vast and patient that was studying us even as we studied it. What could explain the emergence of such integrated systems that bridge the gap between weather phenomena and organized biological activity? Conventional scientific approaches have proposed models based on complex systems theory, suggesting that under specific conditions, the interaction between atmospheric physics, ocean chemistry, and marine biology might create self-organizing systems with emergent properties beyond those of their individual components. Some meteorologists and marine biologists have developed frameworks for understanding these phenomena as meta-organisms systems, where diverse elements, including non-living components, can collectively generate behaviors characteristic of unified living entities. But these explanations struggle to account for the apparent purposefulness observed in living storms, their ability to maintain internal coherence despite changing environmental conditions, and particularly their seeming capacity to respond intelligently to novel stimuli such as research vessels or sampling equipment. These properties suggest something beyond mere emergence from complexity, perhaps a genuine form of distributed cognition arising from the integration of thousands of biological organisms with atmospheric and oceanic processes. More speculative interpretations propose that these phenomena might represent a form of planetary response to changing environmental conditions, perhaps a natural mechanism through which the Earth system tests new configurations of matter, energy, and biology that could enhance resilience against growing climatic disruptions. Others suggest they might be manifestations of the deep oceanic intelligence discussed earlier, instances where the normally slow, distributed awareness of marine systems temporarily accelerates and concentrates into more observable configurations, perhaps as a means of investigating surface conditions or communicating with the atmosphere in ways we're only beginning to recognize. The living storm phenomenon raises profound questions about our fundamental categories of existence. If systems can emerge that blur the boundary between weather patterns and organisms, between physical processes and biological organization, between inanimate matter and purposeful behavior, then perhaps our conceptual division of the world into living and non-living components is more a limitation of human perception than an accurate reflection of reality's true nature. Perhaps life itself is not a binary state, but a spectrum of organization and complexity, with conventional organisms representing only one manifestation of a broader principle that can express itself through many different configurations of matter and energy. The next time you watch weather patterns forming over the ocean, you might consider that what appears to be merely clouds and wind and water might occasionally organize itself into something far more complex and integrated. Something that maintains its coherence, not just through physics, but through the collective activity of countless marine organisms participating in a system larger than themselves. Something that might, in some sense, we're only beginning to comprehend, be alive, not as an individual entity, but as a vast, distributed process of organization that temporarily bridges the domains of atmosphere, ocean, and biology. And you might wonder whether, as human activity increasingly influences both climate and marine ecosystems, we might be inadvertently creating conditions where such phenomena become more common, perhaps representing the planet's attempt to generate new forms of integration and resilience in response to the disruptions we've introduced into Earth's ancient systems. Sleep well with that storm of possibilities swirling through your mind tonight. As we near the end of tonight's journey into the ocean's darkest mysteries, let's reflect on what these swirling currents of the unknown might mean for us, perched as we are on the thin crust of land that dots the surface of this vast, watery world. We've explored anomalies that defy our science, creatures that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of evolution, and phenomena that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about reality itself. We've contemplated the possibility that the ocean harbors forms of awareness so ancient and alien that we can barely perceive their existence, let alone comprehend their nature. And we've considered that humanity's relationship with the ocean might be far more complex and mutual than we've traditionally assumed. That as we study the deep, something in the deep might be studying us in return. What draws us to these mysteries? Why do we feel that strange mixture of dread and fascination when standing at the edge of the sea, looking out over waters that conceal so much from our understanding? Perhaps it's because the ocean represents the perfect embodiment of the unknown in our collective consciousness. Vast, ancient, powerful beyond measurement, filled with life forms so alien, they might as well be from another planet, operating according to rhythms and patterns we're only beginning to recognize. In the ocean, we confront the limits of our knowledge, the boundaries of our understanding, and perhaps most unsettlingly, the possibility that we are not the dominant awareness on this planet we claim as our own. The ocean reminds us that despite all our technological advancement, all our scientific progress, we remain surrounded by mystery. That our carefully constructed frameworks of understanding are provisional at best, applicable perhaps to the thin layer of terrestrial existence we've carved out for ourselves, but insufficient to fully comprehend the majority of our planet's surface and volume. That there are phenomena in this world that resist our categorization, that operate according to principles we haven't yet recognized, that perhaps cannot be fully captured by our current methods of investigation and analysis. And yet, rather than finding this reality disturbing, we might instead approach it with humility and wonder. The mysteries of the ocean aren't threats to human knowledge, but invitations to expand it, to develop new frameworks of understanding that might accommodate phenomena currently beyond our comprehension. The possibility that consciousness might exist in forms utterly unlike our own, distributed across ecosystems, embedded in the molecular structures of water itself, or emerging from the planet-spanning networks of oceanic systems, doesn't diminish human awareness, but places it within a richer, more diverse context of possible minds. Perhaps the greatest gift these ocean mysteries offer is the reminder that we live in a world still filled with the unknown, still capable of surprising and challenging us, despite millennia of human observation and analysis. That beneath the surface of our familiar reality lies depth beyond imagining, complexity beyond calculation, and perhaps awareness beyond our current capacity to recognize. That we are not the culmination of Earth's story, but merely one fascinating chapter in a narrative that began billions of years before us in the ancient seas, and will continue long after our brief moment in the sun has passed. As you drift towards sleep tonight, carried on currents of thought about the mysteries we've explored, perhaps you'll feel something of the ocean's vastness echoing in your own consciousness. Perhaps you'll recognize that the deep, slow awareness we've contemplated isn't entirely alien after all, but shares with your own mind the fundamental experience of being, of processing information, responding to environment, maintaining identity amid constant change. That despite the profound differences in scale and structure, there might be some basis for connection, for mutual recognition between the brief, intense flame of human consciousness and the vast, ancient awareness that might dwell in the planetary ocean. And perhaps, as you sink into dreams, you'll find yourself floating in that liminal space between sleeping and waking, where boundaries dissolve and connections emerge. Where your individual mind briefly touches something larger and older, something that has been patiently aware since long before humanity appeared on Earth's stage. Something that continues its slow, deep thinking beneath the restless surface of the sea, pondering mysteries we can barely imagine from our brief, land-bound perspective. Something that might, in its own alien way, be dreaming of you too, as you dream of the infinite blue depths and the secrets they contain. Sleep well, drifting on that vast ocean of possibility, and remember that mystery itself is not our enemy, but our most profound teacher, reminding us always that the world is larger, stranger, and more wonderful than our current understanding can fully encompass. That beyond the boundaries of what we know lies not threatening chaos, but inviting depth, not emptiness, but fullness beyond our current capacity to perceive. That we are surrounded not by a universe indifferent to our existence, but by realities rich with awareness in forms we're only beginning to recognize. Good night. And may your dreams be as deep and mysterious as the ancient ocean from which all terrestrial life ultimately emerged, and to which, in some sense, we all ultimately belong.